Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I'm a Premier Field Engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's session is part 5 of an ongoing series focusing on Intune, a component of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Specifically, we're in a series dealing with configuration profiles. Today, we'll be focusing on the topic of working with certificates. I'll go ahead and tell you that this is a big topic. This will be a longer session just to be able to cover all of the different ways in which Intune works with certificates, with the various device types that Intune supports. So let's go ahead and dive in. Here's our agenda. Want to briefly talk about what certificates are and why we care about them from IT. Talk about certificates in Intune. Dive into the fun part of the presentation. Talk about types of certificates, the supported platforms for the different types of certificates. Talk about the components that are required for supporting the various types of certificates that we have in Intune, how each one of them work, go through configuring them, see the certificates in action, and wrap up with some troubleshooting tips and tricks for each. All right. So what are certificates? Well, most people who would watch this video will understand what certificates are, but to just go through it, certificates allow you to encrypt online data and communications, right? So very often, or in certain situations, let me back up. In many cases, you are accustomed to, or users are accustomed to entering passwords and such to gain access to resources and so forth. Well, not always.
So let's get this out of the way and
situation where
on
a password
to
or even a username
talking a bit about
is
troubleshooting
needed
and digging
to
into
do
understanding
particular
what you can
communication
do to
and so
dig
forth.
into the
When
issue
you
and understand
need an
what's going
alternate
on
way
when you have
or
challenges.
an
Hopefully,
additional way
you won't have
to
any
validate
but in case you
communication,
do,
to do
let's talk
encryption,
about
to do authentication, whatever, certificates are a great additional choice because there is no user needed for certificates. The certificate is on behalf of the user. Right? And then in terms of the certificate, a certificate works in a combination with a public key and a private key. Each certificate has a public key and a private key. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of public and private key usage, what they are, and so forth. Suffice it to say, this is the way that certificates are kind of used in the authentication. Public keys are public, private keys are more viewed to keep locally as best possible, right? And there are some advantages to certain ones of these certificate profiles in the public-private key arena, and that's all I'll say about that. Certificates, they are generated and distributed from a public key infrastructure. Now, that could be a third-party public key infrastructure, talking generically about certificates now, or they could be your own internal public key infrastructure. All of the discussions here will be focused on using an internal Microsoft PKI infrastructure. Right? So internally or third-party generated, just as I mentioned, and there are a number of different use cases. You can use certificates for authentication, for encryption, for signing, for email protection, and on we go. Right? Okay. So why certificates? Again, identity, being able to provide an additional level of identity in an authentication process, either in situations where you don't have a need or a way to enter a username and password, or also in situations where you might want to do multi-factor authentication. On my own corporate desktop, as an example, when I sign in, to certain resources with my username and password, there's an additional prompt that will come up asking for additional authentication. There's a couple of different ways I can do that. One of them is by certificate. Okay, authentication, another good reason for certificates, encryption, signing, two-factor auth, kind of as we've already mentioned. Now, with that very, very brief discussion about certificates, what they are and why we need them, why do we want to factor Intune into the certificate arena? Well, very simply, we often in IT need a way to be able to deploy certificates to devices and or users in the environment. There are multiple ways that you can deploy certificates to devices and or users. If your device happens to be or user happens to be an Active Directory joined entity, then there's ways you can do that through group policy. If there's non-Active Directory joined, you can do a lot of that through things like certutil. And then there's other components. One you'll see in a minute called an Indes server that helps facilitate actually granting certificates on behalf of a device or user. And others, as well. There's scripts. There's multiple methods. Intune is a method to provide very concise, very defined ways to deploy certificates to devices and or users in your environment. And I'm going to show you a few of the ways that Intune will do that through the session. Okay, so now let's talk about the different types of certs. And each one of these types of certs are certificates that Intune can deploy. I'm going to show you each one of these working, right? The first is the Trusted Root Cert. So the Trusted Root Cert is a very important certificate. It needs to be on devices that will receive certificates from your public key infrastructure. Another way of saying that, you have, again, for the sake of this discussion, you have a Microsoft public key infrastructure internally. And you want to use that public key infrastructure to deploy certificates, user certs, workstation certs, authentication certs, whatever, to your devices. Your device can actually receive those certs. But before that device will trust the cert, it has to know that the cert was delivered by a trusted entity. So to enable building that trust relationship, you have to first deploy the Trusted Root Cert from your certificate authority onto the device, so the device knows when it sees a certificate issued from that certificate authority that it is trustworthy. Now, for third-party certificate authorities, common ones, Komodo, VeriSign, GoDaddy, whatever, those are typically in the system already as trusted root certificates because it's kind of done that way when the OS is produced. For your own PKI, you may or may not have the trusted root certs already present, right? In the case of devices registering and enrolling into Intune, likely you don't have certs, and so you need to find a way to get the certs onto the device. I'll show you how to do that really easy for the trusted root cert, and we'll start there. Okay, so that's what a trusted root cert is. Other certs, so the PKCS is a particular certificate profile type that is supported in Intune. The uses include authentication and SMIME signing. So PKCS stands for Public Key Cryptographic Standard. One of the hallmarks of PKCS certs is that the certificates themselves are unique per device, per user. The format of this particular certificate standard allows you to store multiple crypto objects within a single file. So when we're talking about PKCS certs, we're talking typically about the .pfx extension, .p12. So if you've worked with certificates at all, you know there are two common file extensions. One is .pfx and the other is .cer. Here we're talking about .pfx certificates. One thing about these PKCS certs is that the payload of the cert of the PKCS standard, the payload when you're negotiating certs and so forth, it does contain the public and the private key pair. So that fact alone is viewed by some to be unfavorable. You definitely benefit from keeping the private key on the device for which the cert will be issued, and so forth, right? So, just know that it is a difference. The public and private key pair will traverse the network as part of the PKCS certificate profile that you'll see in a minute. And then one other uniqueness about this, which makes it very favorable in the eyes of IT admins probably, is that Indes is not required. So Indes I've mentioned already. Indes stands for Network Device Enrollment Service. Indes is a requirement of one particular type of certificate profile, namely SCEP, Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol. You'll see that in a minute. Installing NDES is not a huge problem. It's very well documented, but it has a lot of moving parts, right? And it does require an additional server. So when you have a scenario where you don't have to have that additional server and that additional amount of complex configuration, it's viewed as a positive thing. And so PKCS, Certificate Profile Deployments in Intune, you don't have NDES at all, right? You'll see all of that coming up. Okay, there's another one called Imported PKCS. So this is a specific scenario where, well, the uses first are SMIME signing and SMIME encryption, but this is a specific scenario where you have a cert type. This is typically used for email encryption, right? And you need to have this cert that is the same cert across all devices, right? That cert, having a common cert across all devices is not supported with either PKCS or SCEP. And so there's this thing called imported PKCS. Now, the uses of this with email, you'll have a need to have the cert to read your mail, and as the cert gets renewed, which it does regularly, you'll need to have maybe the whole history of the certs chain on the device so that you can read even older email. One uniqueness about this, so we'll talk about for PKCS in general, for SCEP in general, for trusted certificates in general, we'll talk about your PKI infrastructure because it's integral. Here, we will talk about your PKI infrastructure, but we're really not going to touch the PKI infrastructure because this does not really so much require, that's a bad way to say it. The PKI infrastructure is required here, but the PKI infrastructure is not going to be the one to deliver the cert. You're going to export the cert from your PKI infrastructure and import that cert into Intune and deliver it that way. Again, you'll see that as we go through. But this is kind of a unique one. Based on my experience, it's the least used of all the different certificate profiles that we can do in Intune, but it does fill the specific need for email encryption and so forth. And then finally, SCEP. So SCEP is the most used, in my experience, certificate profile type in Intune. SCEP can be used for authentication, also SMIME signing. SCEP, Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol. Again, this results in unique certs per device, per user. This is a known standard, first introduced by Cisco out there and pretty understood, widely adopted, supported. It does require the use of an NDES server for acquiring certificates. So an NDES server is a server that sits out there on your network. It could be in your DMZ, it could be on your internal network, depending on your configuration, and interacts with Intune. Intune will request certificates from the NDES server. NDES server will shuttle that internally or next door, depending on your configuration, to your certificate server, receive the response back, and forward that back to Intune. You'll see it work in just a minute. One key part of this, the private key never leaves the device. That's seen as a very favorable kind of configuration by security typically, right? And then this probably applies to PKCS too, but because of the unique key and certificate on each device, you can do selective certificate revocation and so forth. We're really not going to get into certificate revocation in this session, but FYI. Okay, so that's the precursor. Let's start the journey to talk our way through all of the different kinds of certificate profiles that you can deploy in Intune. We'll start with the trusted root certs. Okay, so in terms of supported platforms, you see the list here on the screen. Essentially, every platform you might want to support with trusted certs, you can absolutely do. Right? All the Androids that are there to date, Mac OS, iOS, Windows 8.1 and 10, Windows Phone as well. I didn't put that on there because Windows phones are largely not used anymore, but nonetheless. In terms of the components, really pretty simple. You have a certificate authority, you have Intune, and then you have devices on which you want to publish
certificates. Okay? Here's a little bit about how it works. So first, you're going to have an admin who is going to export the trusted root certificate from your certificate authority. Then, once we have that certificate, the admin is going to create a trusted root certificate profile and upload the trusted root certificates into Intune. Intune will then store those trusted root certs. Once they're in Intune, you can create a policy, or you can assign that policy to your devices. The device will receive the trusted root cert. The trusted root cert deployment is the simplest of all cert profiles in Intune, right? Works very, very well, very, very seamlessly. So let's go look at how this is set up and actually work our way towards seeing it. Okay, so I'm going to open up my device management console, and I'm going to go to devices. Well, actually, I'm starting here prematurely. I'm going to pull in my certificate authority, because the first thing I need to do is export my trusted root certificate from my certificate authority. So to do that, I'm just going to launch my certificate authority console. Here it is. And I'm just going to simply, actually, I'm going to go ahead and open this because it will take a minute, at least sometimes it does, to open that. But either way, first thing I need to do is go to Properties on the Certificate Authority, click on View Certificate, and then on the Details page, I can copy that certificate to a file, work through my wizard. Notice it's going to be a .cer extension, which means the private key is not included with the cert. I'll give it a name and hit Next. And it's going to tell me it already exists, which I know it does. I'll replace it, doesn't matter. Finish. And I have exported my trusted root certificate from my certificate authority, right? That's critical before I can do anything else. Now that I have that exported, I need to bring it into Intune so that I can deliver it to devices. So to do that, I will pull up my Intune console. I'm in Devices. Actually, again, just for the recording, since it's still fairly new as of the time I'm recording this, this is the Device Management Console. It's where you can work on all Intune related things. Yes, it's called Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, completely true. These are the Intune capabilities. If you were to look at the Intune portal that's part of Azure, you would find these same capabilities, just organized a bit differently. But this is where, for all Intune related stuff, we should go these days to do different tasks. So that's where I'm going to stay here. All right, so under Devices, I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to go to Configuration Profiles. So you see that I already have one for Windows, one for iOS, and one for Android. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at each one. I'm going to start with Windows. So actually, let me back up a minute. I'm going to go create one so you can just see, and then we'll look at each one. So create a profile. Here, I'll just give it a name. I'm not going to save this, so I'll just call it blah. Great. I'm going to choose a platform. And the platform is going to be Windows, Android, or iOS. I will choose Windows for now. And then the configuration type will be Trusted Certificate right here. Now, once I have that, notice that I just have a couple of configurations. One is to browse to and import the .cer file I just saved off from my trusted root cert. The other on Windows is to decide what store I want that cert to go into, right? Now, I'll just say here, and this is not necessarily true in every platform, but it's a good just kind of rule of thumb to have in the back of your mind. In some cases, you will want to deploy a user cert. In other cases, you'll want to deploy a device cert. So if you're going to deploy on Windows, as an example, both user and device certs, you're going to need that trusted root cert from your CA that's issuing those certs deployed to the user store and also to the device store. So in other words, way to say that, I've not seen it personally, but I've heard of issues where if you deploy a cert profile, like a SCEP profile or whatever, to a device, but you've never deployed your trusted root cert to the device store, that's going to be a problem because that device cert you've just issued won't be trusted because you don't have the trusted root cert in the device store. So just bear that in mind as you're going through this, right? Now, if you look at other ones here, and I'll just quickly pick Android Enterprise and do the trusted root cert as well, you're going to see all you have is a choice to upload the certificate file. You don't have a choice which store it goes into, at least in Intune, right? And same for iOS. So let me look. So I have my trusted root cert for Windows. I've already deployed it. Here's my properties and my setting. So you see that I've already uploaded my root cert right here. I've chosen to put the cert into the user certificate store there. I have my iOS trusted root device, or trusted root cert. I've chosen to, here's the settings. So I've already uploaded the root cert there as well. I've already assigned these too. So here's the assignment to users, so all users. I did the same for Windows. And then finally, I have Android here. And under, I did all users and all devices here. That's interesting. I meant to do just all users, so I will keep it consistent, so I'll save that again. And in terms of properties, same thing. I just have one root cert uploaded, and we are good to go. All three of these are assigned, and so on, right? Okay, so let's pull this out of the window for a minute. So in terms of actually having these implemented, let's actually go look and see that the trusted root cert is installed. You saw that I have it assigned, right? You can go look and validate that in fact the root cert is installed. I'll just pick on one for now, and we'll go look on each device in a minute. So I'll just do Windows. We'll work through one at a time. So I'll do Windows. And so I've assigned this. If I go look at device status, I will see succeeded. I will also see the same message under user status, succeeded. And then per settings status, I will see compliant. So I have my Windows, that's interesting, Windows 8.1 trusted root, I guess that's the name of it, even though I chose Windows 10, so interesting naming. But nonetheless, I do have it actually compliant. So that is an interesting name, Windows 8.1 Trust. And if I look at the name of my certificate profile, this is the name. It's not Windows 8.1. Oh, look, and I did choose Windows 8.1 and later. That's interesting. So this is a Windows 10 device that I've done this on, so pretty easy. 8.1 and 10 are the same in terms of trusted root, but nonetheless. All right, so while I have Windows up here, let's go look at the Windows device that I've deployed this to. This is a Windows 10 system. And looking at directly the certificate store that I already have up here, so it's my current user, intermediate certificate authority, which is where I told Intune to place the cert, and looking at the cert specifically, here is the trusted root cert from my certificate authority. So I know, in fact, that Windows devices, I am good to go, right? The cert is here, deployed. I'm going to close both of these and move the Windows device out of the picture. Now, in terms of the iOS device, let me pull in my iOS device. So this is just the, if I can grab it, this is just the iOS device through Reflector is the app I'm using. So I'm mirroring the screen on my iOS device. And so just to prove that the cert is here, I can go into Settings and then go down to General and then go down to Device Management. The screen, there we go. So then go down to Device Management and then click on Management Profile or tap on it and then tap on More Details. And then specifically, I'm looking for a certificate, and it's right here, from my certificate authority. So this cert is, in fact, installed on the iOS device, so I know that I am good to go. So let me move this out of the way. Now, also, while I'm here, I'll turn off screen mirroring so that that's out of the way. Cool. While I'm here on the iOS discussion, we go to the specific iOS trusted root deployment. and device status, I will see, again, succeeded, user status, succeeded, and then per setting status, compliant. Now, you may run into situations where something goes wrong and you need to troubleshoot this further, so I'll talk to you about that more in just a minute. Okay, turning our attention toward Android. So I've actually got a profile already created here, but I've kind of been thinking about how I want to do this. This is an enterprise trusted cert profile. I want to actually do device manager just because it's easy and consistent and so on. So I'm going to delete this real quick and bear with me while I set up another one for Android device admin. And this is an older style. This is an older style way of managing Android, which I called out is not going to be supported. It's deprecated by Google. But for now, this is supported across all of them. So instead of demonstrating all of the different Android ways of doing these things, I'll just do Android Device Administrator. You see Android Enterprise there. But let me do Trusted Certificate here and quickly upload my file. I believe it's still on the desktop. Yeah. So here's my file. So I'll quickly upload that and create this profile. And then I need to assign it to my all users group. There we go, and save. So we'll go ahead and kick the Android device here and let it hopefully get the policies. Let me go to all devices view and my Android device, tell it to sync. And we'll wait just a second or two while that goes and synchronizes. In the meantime, I will navigate back over to the devices list where I created that particular profile. And then we'll pause for a minute while everything percolates down. Be right back. Okay, so long enough. So one of the things with Android, let me just pull the Android system in and show you. Here's my Android tablet. So I've synced it. So the sync has had plenty of time to get down. But in order to install the cert, you've kind of got to swipe down from the top, and it will give you your pending list. And you see the very top one in the company portal. You need to install security credentials. So I'm going to tap on that, and it's going to give me the certificate name. That is just kind of a random set of text. I'm going to name it Intune or Tailspin Toys. Tailspin Toys. And then Trusted Root Cert. And give me a second while I type this. All right, good enough. And so then I'm going to tap on OK, and that's it. The cert is actually installed. Well, how do I know the cert's installed? Let me show you. I'm going to go back to the desktop and navigate to Settings, and then on Settings, I'm going to go to Security, and then in Security, I'm going to scroll down a little bit and look at Trusted Credentials. And then for Trusted Credentials, I'm just going to scroll down under System to the T's and see if I have anything there. So nothing under System. Let me scroll all the way back up top. All right. And the suspense is mounting, I'm sure, but this was deployed to user, right? So I should have started with user profile, and sure enough, there it is. I've got my certificate from Tailspin Toys, from my certificate authority that is deployed here. I can tap on it. I can see different things about it. If I want to, I can go back and forth. And so I definitely have the certificate, right? So let me pull Android out of the way and see if my Android device admin profile actually shows success yet. And waiting for this to populate. It actually shows an error, which is odd because I do actually have the cert. I think that actually might still be an old message, so we'll see if that clears up. But the cert is definitely there. Why this is not caught up, don't know. But you saw the cert is installed and in place. Okay, what about troubleshooting with these trusted root certs? There, again, this is generally a very straightforward, very problem-free certificate deployment type, right? But if you do run into problems, there are ways, in fact, to see what's going on. I will save the details here and just mention it. We'll see more of the details in a bit whenever we get into some of the other certificate profile things, but specifically on Windows, there's logging that you can grab into. There's event logging and different things for iOS. And Android, there's the company portal logging that you can tap into. Now, some of that you may have to work with support on because in certain Android configurations, as an example, you won't be able to get the company portal logging yourself. You'll send it into Microsoft, and we can work with you and help you on that. But still, there are logs at that level that if you're looking at that level, you probably want to be working with us anyway. So, but just know. And then once you have that information, you generally can find out what's kind of going wrong. Okay. All right. So the next deployment type, or the next certificate profile that we'll be talking about is this PKCS certificate profile. So here, PKCS supports all of these platforms. Now you'll notice that largely this is the same, but there are a couple of things missing. So Windows 8.1, for example, is missing. We only have 2 of the 4 Android types here that are supported, right? So there's others that we're still working on, but and hopefully that will be there soon. But right now we support these 2, at least as of this recording. What are the required components? Well, we add a few more here for sure to make this work. So you need Intune. You do need Active Directory. Now, Active Directory is there for certificate services supporting the CA. It's not there because your devices have to be Active Directory joined or anything like that, but to support your certificate authority. You do need your trusted root certificate, so the certs that we just deployed. You'll need one of 2 connectors. We'll focus on one. The Microsoft Intune certificate connector is required, and that's going to be in place to shuttle certificate requests from your device through Intune and over to the certificate authority and so forth. Also, interestingly, and you'll see this, this is the same software for this connector as you will use in SCEP. It's the exact same software. The difference is how you configure it, right? So, and maybe where you locate it. In my case, the software will be installed on my certificate authority. You don't have to do that, but in my lab, it makes sense. Another thing to call out, for the Microsoft Intune certificate connector, we do support up to 100 instances of the connector running per tenant. So one of the questions that will come up, especially if you're really heavy into certificate provisioning, is do you have failback, is there failover, is there load balancing, and so forth? And the answer is absolutely true for the Intune certificate connector. Now there's an optional connector here, the PFX certificate connector. We'll talk about this connector in the next section because it's specifically there for handling the imported PKCS certificate scenario. So we'll talk about it there. But optional here if you wanted to think of it kind of as part of the scenario too. Now, one thing about this, the connector itself, in the case of the PFX certificate connector, only supports a single instance per tenant instead of the 100 supported by the other. And it's used specifically, again, for the imported PKCS scenario. And then, of course, you need a device in which you're going to deploy the certificates to, in our case, Windows, iOS, and Android, and also a Windows server that's going to host your Intune certificate connector. and or your PFX certificate connector for Intune, as we talked about. All right, so how does this work? Well, a little bit more complexity, but hopefully it makes sense. Now, this is from the perspective, how it works is from the perspective of after you have the infrastructure configured. So I'll show you the configuration of the infrastructure in a moment, but assuming the infrastructure is configured, the way this works is your admin is going to create a PFX certificate profile and save that into Intune. As a part of creating that profile, the admin will assign that profile to appropriate groups of users and or devices, right? And so once that happens, then the Intune service is going to request that the on-prem certificate service create a new cert for the user or the device. So the certificate service then is going to work with the on-prem CA, grab the PFX blob, and finally upload it into Intune. And then the certificate is going to be delivered to the device. One little kind of in the weeds kind of thing is the PFX itself is decrypted and re-encrypted using the device management cert on the device. And then the status for that cert is reported back, right? Okay, so let's look at how we configure this. Oh, and before I get into the configuration for this, I do want to pop back into the Intune console and show you the trusted root cert that we set up. I mentioned on the Android side that it was still showing error, and that since you see the cert actually on the device, that probably hadn't caught up yet. And so just to show you, if I now look at the Android status, it's green, so you see it succeeded. Device status, user status, and well, as soon as it loads. Okay, good. And then per setting status, all confirm that everything is good. So just wanted to show that to you before we move ahead. So that said, let's go ahead and get into the configuration of the system to deploy PKCS cert. So the first stop in the journey is to move to my server that is going to be configured with the certificate authority. Right now in my lab, the certificate authority server will be the one I focus on for configuring things in the certificate authority, as well as connectors and different things. So in your case, you might not want to put your connector and so on the certificate authority server. That's fine. In mine, I'm doing that for convenience. Also, in my lab, in terms of certificates that you can configure to be deployed through the PKCS profile, really you can deploy a number of certs. The key thing is to make sure that the cert has the right attributes. Specifically, client authentication is one of the attributes as you'll see. But just for simplicity, in my lab, I'm going to use the user certificate template as an example. So you see I've actually already got one created. I'm going to go ahead and delete that and just create it from scratch. So let me go ahead and get rid of that, and then we will create from scratch. I'll also right-click on certificate templates, select manage, and then that will open up. Okay, and I also want to delete the template from here so that we're starting from scratch. I had already done that, so apologies. But either way, so to create our certificate template that we're going to deploy with the PKCS cert profile type, I'm just going to duplicate the user template, okay? So I'm going to duplicate that. And as we go through, there's just a few things we want to confirm. So on the compatibility tab, I'm just going to leave this as default. I will point out that in our documentation that it calls out server 2008. It really doesn't matter. I'm just going to leave this as default. Then on the general tab, just provide a name. So I'll call this PFX demo cert template. All right, cool. And you'll notice that under the template name, it uses the same thing I typed in up here, but it removes the spaces. You could actually change the name of this at this stage if you wanted to, right? But I'm going to leave it as it is. And then everything else there on the general tab is okay. And then on the request handling tab, right here, I'm going to make sure that the purpose is set to signature and encryption, and then also make sure allow private key to be exported is configured. On the cryptography tab, going to make sure 2048 is the minimum key size, right there. And then moving on from there, the subject name tab, I want to make sure supply in the request is configured, and it is, because as you request these certs, there will be certain detail that needs to be added to the certs that you don't have information enough to supply in advance, and it will be different based on the device. So supplying that in the request is important. On the extensions tab, specifically under application policy, you want to make sure client authentication is here. Now, optionally and by default, secure email and encrypting file system are here. Those are not strictly required, but you definitely want client authentication, and just leave those others here. Nothing wrong with having those because in certain use cases you might want them anyway. And then under key usage, if you edit that, we want to make sure signature as proof of origin is not selected. Now that's specifically for iOS devices, but you can see it's not selected by default anyway. So I'm not making any changes there, and I'm good. And then on the security tab, I want to make a couple of changes here. First, and what I'm going to do here is just for my lab, right? You might do something a little bit different, and that's what's interesting about doing certs anyway, is there are certain requirements that we will list out and show you, but then there may be some tweaks that are different that you might want for your environment. And so this is just a demo to show you how to set this up. If there are differences that you want to implement, that's great. Just make sure that you have the basic needs as we're kind of talking about here. So I'm going to add the system account. I'm going to check name on that. It's going to be this one. You'll see why I'm adding the system account in a minute. And make sure the system account has full control. So I'm going to make sure that has full control. And then I'm also going to add the computer account for the computer that's going to host the Intune certificate connector. So in my lab, that will be this same server that also hosts the certificate authority. Doesn't have to be that way, but whatever system is going to host the connector, you want to make sure has these rights. So I'm going to go make sure I can add a computer account. And then I'm going to add this one. Great, check names on that. And okay. And then I want to make sure that that computer account has read and enroll permissions. So once I've done that, then I have completed the requirements for building my certificate template. And you see that I have my certificate template here. So now that I've created the template, I'm just going to minimize this because we'll be back to the certificate authority in other portions of our discussion today. I need to enable the certificate authority to issue the certificate that I just created. So I'm going to right click and say new certificate template to issue, and then go down to my PFX demo certificate template and approve that to be issued. And so now this is at the top of the list. We know that it can be issued, in fact, without any problem. And so let's move on to the next step. And that will be to adjust permissions on the certificate authority itself. So I'm going to go to the certificate authority, go to properties, and then go to security. And so here I need to make sure that appropriate permissions are there to allow my system account, in my case, and also the system that's hosting the Intune certificate connector to be able to issue and manage certs and also request certificates. Let me do that real quick. So I'm going to click add, and I'm going to make sure that computer object is selected, and I'm going to type back in the name of this server because it will be the one hosting my certificate connector. Check names on that. Great. And then add issue and manage certs plus request certs. And then also here, I'm going to use the system account. And again, you'll see why in a minute. And make sure that the system account also has issue and manage certs and request certs. All right. So we're good. So I'm going to hit OK on that and minimize my certificate authority. And then I'm going to open up the Intune console, which is down here. It's already open. So bring that up. All right. And now what I need to do is install the Intune certificate connector. All right. So to do that, I'm going to go down to tenant administration and then go to connectors and tokens. And from there, go to certificate authority or certificate connectors down here. And you see I don't have any right now. So I need to add one. And so this will be my certificate connector specifically for the PKCS certificate profile type. Now, one thing, and I think I mentioned this already, the SCEP link here to download the connector for SCEP and the link here to download the connector for PKCS, they point to the exact same location. So the file I'm going to download will be called the indes connector. We'll have indes in the name, right? Don't be confused by that because they are the same connector. The difference is how you install and perhaps where you install, right? So when we get to the SCEP section, you'll see me download the same connector, different place. I'll just download it from here and configure it differently. It'll be on a different system, right? But anyway, don't be confused. So I'm going to download the connector here, save it to my desktop. Save as, great. Save that to my desktop. And now that that's downloaded, I will move it into the center here. You can see, yeah, you see indes connector setup, right? So same piece of software. I'm just going to launch this. Oops, I made a mistake there. Let me run it as admin. And now I'll run it. And okay, we have it here, right? So we're just going to click next. And oh, looks like I already have it. That's interesting. We remove it and we'll just set it up from scratch. I guess I forgot to clean that up when I was getting ready for this, but we're good. So stand by, we'll get this thing cleaned up and then we will install it again. All right, good. So it's gone. Let me do this again, run as administrator, so pretend this is the first time. Forgot to clean that up the first time. Great, so click next, and so accept the license terms, of course. And by the way, this is the default install directory. You can change it if you like, but this is a directory that you will want to at least remember where this is, right, for a couple of reasons. So let me go ahead and open up the path to this. So this PC, go down to the C drive, program files. So right now, I don't have a Microsoft Intune folder. You see just that. So let's go ahead and do the install. I'll pull this down. Click next. And so here is the difference, right? This is the same piece of software for SCEP and the PKCS. The difference is I want to select PFX distribution when I'm doing this. Now notice you can do SCEP and PFX, right? If you want to use this connector on the same system, you can, but we're just going to keep it separate, for now. And this is on my certificate authority. So I'm going to click next and I'm going to click install. And so we're going to go and install the connector. You can see now that I do have a Microsoft Intune. Should just update this. There we go. There's the Microsoft Intune directory. And so if right here on this page, I'm going to go ahead and click to launch the connector because we need to configure it a bit more. If you forget to do that for some reason, then you can always go into the connector UI and launch it from here. Right? This is where it's located. So it'd be the same effect. So I'll get rid of that for now. So in this, all I'm going to do is sign in to my Intune tenant, and that will create the connection and the install should be good. Now, a couple of little tips along the way here. In order to successfully complete the sign-in, in some instances, I've seen a couple of problems where maybe you don't have TLS 1.2 configured correctly and workable on your system. So make sure TLS 1.2 is enabled. I've also seen a scenario, I can't remember if it's this connector or one of the other ones, but nevertheless, I'll say it. If you have IE, enhanced security, enabled, then you would want to, if you run into problems, you'll want to disable it, go ahead and do the sign in, complete the install, then you can turn it back on, no problem, but I've seen that get in the way as well. So this, hopefully, knock on wood, should be pretty easy Let's go ahead and sign in. And this should pop up and give me, yeah, it has in cache my account, so I shouldn't even have to enter the password. So let's see what happens here. Okay, great. So successfully enrolled. So that means that the connector is good. Now, if I have a proxy server, then you don't want to deal with that, right? On the advanced tab, all I might choose is if I want to use a service account, which I'm not in this case, I'm using the system account, which is why I gave it the perms, right? Then I would put that in here. And I will be using a system account when you see me install this again for the portion of the discussion focused on NDES and SCEP, right? But anyway, so we have everything good here. I'm going to apply it just for good measure to make sure, and it looks like it applied, and I'm going to close. Now that I have that installed, we want to just to make sure, restart the Intune connector, make sure that it's all set. So I'm going to go to services. Let me just go to command prompt. That's fine. I'll go to services. That's easy enough for you to see it. All right, cool. So let's go to services. All right, and I'm going to run that as an admin and go down to Intune, connector service. It's running. I'm just going to restart it. So that is done. I'll close this, and now I want to go and validate that the connection between the connector and Intune is correct. So I'm going back into the console, and so I want to just click out of this and click back into my certificate connectors to effectively refresh. And hopefully we have a connector here that shows green and connected. It's taking a little bit longer to refresh. Interesting. So let's see. Okay, so active. So we have our connector. We can look at the time. Now the time, the actual hours are a little bit offset, but you can look at the minutes and you can see that it is recently connected and active. So that looks good so far. Now, that's really it for setting up the connector or setting up the environment for being able to deploy PKCS certificate profiles. That's really it, right? And that's one of the beauties of setting up this type of certificate deployment. It really is straightforward. The only thing is making sure that you have a template or templates that you want to deploy in your certificate authority, have your connector installed, and then you're ready effectively to start deploying your PKS profiles, right, at that stage. The one thing that I would at this point do, if I hadn't already done it, is make sure that my trusted root certificates were exported and deployed to the devices where I do want to deploy PKS certs. But in the previous section, you saw that I've already done that. I exported my trusted root cert. I've already deployed the trusted root cert to my iOS, Windows, and Android devices. And so I don't need to do that step here. I've already done it. And so truly, I'm ready to start creating PKCS certificate profiles. So let's go over there and take a look at a few profiles that I've already created. And actually, before we do, so that is the configuring part. So officially, we're changing to the in action part. So let me pull the machine back in and navigating over to the section where I have these configured. And in full disclosure, I couldn't really configure these until I had the PKCS setup complete and validated. So I did pause the video and go create these. So I just created these demo ones, and you'll see that we have Android PKCS, iOS PKCS, and Windows PKCS. So let's go and look at each one. So we will start with iOS, right? PKCS. And so what you'll notice is that there are some slight differences in the UI between configuring each one of these. Those differences, not really sure if it's a true functional difference, but there's a couple of things that are a little bit different between each one. But you'll see that I have these configured in a demo way and successful. So I'll go into iOS PKCS 2 and 2 because I made a mistake on the first one, and look at the properties. So here, I did select the iOS, iPadOS, PKCS certificate, configured my settings. All right. And so as I go through and configure my settings, again, you can choose what you want here. This is just for demo, but the renewal threshold of 20, my certificate authority is the FQDN to my certificate server. The certificate authority name is here. Now, if you don't know what these are, I'll tell you. The FQDN should be pretty easy. The certificate authority name is right here. But if you just want to validate it as another way of kind of getting this information, oh, come on. You can open up an elevated command prompt and run certutil. And so you will get back the FQDN and then the name of your certificate authority. You can just copy it from there, right? And then once you have that, the certificate template name. So this is here, the certificate template name down here that I created without spaces, because again, if you go to properties and you look at the template name, you will see that it does not, in fact, have spaces there in the name here as shown, right? So here's the template name. So I'll just cancel that, minimize. And then the certificate type, user, I'm deploying to users. I deployed my trusted root certs to users. I'm going to deploy this to user. The subject name format will be automatically entered based on whether you choose user or device. So if I change to device, the subject name format would adjust. The subject alternative name, recommendation is to use UPN if you have, unless you have a reason to do something besides UPN. And then the format here, this is just a token, kind of like a wild card. So the username that's logged in, and then here's my the name of my Intune tenant, and that's it, right? So I've created that one. I've deployed it to all users. I've assigned it to all users, as you'll see when this comes up. Come on. There we go. Right, so that's for iOS. Now let's go look at, let's go look, well, while we're here, I'll go ahead and show you. Well, let's go look at the other one. So we'll look at Android next. So for Android, PKCS, same kind of deal. Here, again, we support a couple of different types of deployments, right, for Android Enterprise and also Android Device Admin. So here I chose Android Device Admin to stay consistent with what I did on the trusted root. PKCS cert, now we have 9 items configured here. And so a lot of them look the same, but you'll see some differences here as we go along. Right, so this renewal period 20, validity period, cert authority, and template, all that's the same. Subject name format, though, is new. That was not in the iOS one. Subject alternative name is UPN, and you'll notice it's just a drop down. You don't have to configure the token. Here we have extended key usage, and I've chosen client authentication. So extended key usage was not in iOS. And then also we have root certificate. So this is where I chose the root certificate for Android that I deployed. So if you don't have a successful deployment, interestingly, you won't be able to choose a root certificate. So you need to deploy the root certificate, make it successful, and then you'll be able to choose the root certificate here. Right, and then I've deployed this to all users just as well as I did the other one. Right, so for assignments, all users will come up. There it is. And then finally, we have Windows PKCS, and this one's PKCS 2 because I made a mistake on the initial entry, but these are good. Right, so in terms of properties, again, a lot of things in common. Windows 10 or later because we don't support Windows 8. 10 items configured here, so let's go look at those. So the first one's all in common. So the validity period, now this one is interesting, right? In how you want to be handling your key storage provider, because with Windows, we do have TPM, right? So I chose this. I'm using a virtual machine, And I do have that virtual machine enabled with a virtual TPM, and so this works just fine. Then the certificate authority information, certificate template name, certificate type, all that's the same. Here the UPN, kind of like we had for iOS, the extended key usage, client authentication, and we're good. And then assignments we have to all users, just like we did for everything else. All right. Now let's go back through each one of these and confirm that they are in fact deployed. We'll go in the same order that we started with. So let's start with iOS and click on this. And so you will see that we are successful. You see a green there. So device status shows that we are successful in deploying. User status, successful in deploying. Give that a second. There we go. Per setting status will show us that we are compliant. Oh, that hasn't caught up yet, but it will. And then the certificates itself, you'll see the certificate that we actually have deployed to the device. There it is. And so then to validate on the device, we can actually pull up the device, and I have my screen being mirrored in Reflector. Let me pull that. All right, here we go. And so here's my iOS device. And so like before, I will just go to Settings and then scroll down to General, and then scroll on down to my management profile, device management here, and then tap on management profile, look at more details, and scroll on down. And what I expect to see here is a certificate that was issued to my username. And here it is. Right now, how can I know that the certificate itself that was deployed is the correct one here? Well, so I'm going to dig in. I'm going to kind of merge the troubleshooting part here a bit and just tap in and show you on this. So I'm going to tap into my certificate here, and what I'm interested in is certainly you see the UPN, the email address that came from the UPN, the common name, whatever. But what I want to do is validate the cert here is the one of the ones that was just issued. And so I'm going to scroll down to there's a lot of detail in here, but I'm going to scroll down to SHA1. And you will see 1426 EFE blah, 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 right? Now, that is going to be the equivalent of the thumbprint for the cert. So let me pull this to the side. It may actually time out on me, but that's okay. I'll try to keep it awake. Come on, get over there. Nope, it's going to stay in the center. That's okay. Let me open this up. And so this certificate, I believe, this one, let me get out of the way. Yeah, this one that's highlighted is the certificate request. I'll come back to this in a minute. Is the certificate request that was processed, right? And one of the things you'll see here is the thumbprint of the cert, right? And so 1426 EFE, 1426 EFE over here. So I know that I'm looking at the cert that was in fact issued to this device through the PKCS profile. This is for iOS, right? Now, let me get iOS out of here because you can tell that it is there. And minimize this again. I'll come back to this in just a minute and we'll talk through it again. So now on the Android side, so let's go back to configuration profiles on the Android side. And so here's PKCS. And so if we look at the same status indicators, device status, we should be successful here. So you see green, successful. Should also see successful here. User status, successful. Cool. See if this has it updated yet. Nope, nope, no data. And certificates, right? Now, on the Android side, so we see our cert that was deployed here. On the Android side, I do need an extra step to be able to get this. Let me pull the Android device in for a second. Okay, so here is my Android device. All right, and so like before, let me just show you. If we go to security, and then we scroll down and look at our trusted credentials here, right? So like before, I showed you that we do have the trusted root certificate in the store, but you don't see the certificate that was deployed to this device. And that's because we, like before, need to, and here's my company portal. I'm going to just scroll down from the top right? And what you see is you need to install security credentials right here, right? So I've got to choose in this configuration to install those security credentials. And here I will call this my PKCS cert, just because that's for my demo and that's what I care about. So I can also say what it's for if I want to, kind of deal. Here. Trying to get rid of that. Let me just type this again. All right, and then go ahead and minimize the keyboard here. Let's see. There, tap the down arrow to get rid of the keyboard. I'm going to hit OK. And so we're going to go through and choose that I want to install this certificate and say allow. And then hopefully we have the cert installed. So let's validate that that's actually the case. And so this time I'm going to use a different approach just to show you another neat little utility on Android to help you look at your certificate store. So I actually have just installed it from the store. It's called My Certificates. And so I'm going to open that up. And what I want to do is inspect certificates from the store. So I'm going to click on that or tap on that. And it's just going to ask me to allow. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And so notice the certificate in chain, right? There's two certificates here. So this one is the one that I just installed. So issued to me, I can see all the detail about it. But then you can see the trust chain on the device. If you just simply swipe to the left, right? Then you'll see this one is the trusted root cert from my certificate authority. So a really, really useful utility, let me get rid of all this, to be able to validate certificate deployment on Android devices. And so lastly, let's go take a look at Windows. So let's go back to our configuration profiles here. Look back at Windows PKCS. Come on. Come on. There we are. Windows PKCS, and check to see if this cert has deployed successfully. And it should have. So under device status, succeeded. Under user status, succeeded. Under per setting status, and still has no data. That's interesting. Certificates, we'll see the certificate that was actually deployed here. So if we pull back in the Windows 10 device for a minute, we'll just go check and see. So here is my Windows 10 system. So to just validate that the cert is actually there, I will go to certmgr.msc and look at this in the personal store. And sure enough, we have our certificate that was issued by my certificate authority. And if we go to properties on it, not properties, if I open it and look at details and scroll down, well, so it's for client authentication. The template is just by ID here, but it is the template that we were interested in. And so that as well is successful. So let's get this out of the way and move on to talking a bit about troubleshooting and digging into understanding what you can do to dig into the issue and understand what's going on when you have challenges. Hopefully you won't have any challenges, but in case you do, let's talk about it. So to do that, let me pull back in my certificate authority. And there's a couple of things that I want to show you first. So I've already kind of showed you this a little bit, right? So we'll work our way back to it. But the starting point for troubleshooting when you deploy to devices is the device itself. So on Android, on iOS, on Windows, you have logs that you can use. Android has the OMADM log, which you can get access to depending on the kind of configuration you're doing. iOS has the console logs. You can definitely send those to support, work with support in those scenarios. Windows has event logs and different things, right? So I'm not going to focus really on the device for this, but I will move instead to the kind of logging that we have on the server side. So let me minimize Intune. And specifically, so this is, you already saw this. I'll come back to that in a minute. Specifically, I want to look at the Indes connector service. So the way this works from the device, once we get the policy to actually enroll the device, we're going to ask the connector to help us do that. And so the connector would be a pivotal piece in the process to get that done. So here's the Indes connector service and the logs that we can use. And you see the logs that are recent, right, from the work that I've done trying to set this up. All right, and so then how do you look at this? So you can use Notepad, you can use CM Trace if you want to, especially if, you can use one of those too if you really, really want to have your eyes crossed trying to look at these logs. These are what are called service logs. And so the tool that's best to use these is called SVC Trace Viewer. You can get this from a couple of different places. I think where I got that was from the Windows 7 resource kit. Either way. And so if you just have this tool and you grab the recent log or the log that you want to view, I'll just grab this one and pull it into the tool. Actually, you can grab both. I thought you could. Let's let it work on itself for a minute. See if I can grab this one into it. Yeah, so you can grab both if you want to. And pull them in. Maybe that one will show up here in a second. Yeah, it looks like it's processing it. Let's see what it does. Maybe you can just have one at a time. Either way, doesn't matter. So here you can see exactly what's been going on with your requests for certs and so on. Here's actually some really good, I bypassed them. Here's some good information about the cert being downloaded, some certificates being issued, activity, and so on. So I won't really go through this in great detail, but know that this is there. If there's errors along the way, we will show those to you, and very good to be able to look at. Now, I tried to do this a couple of different times. Let me get rid of this and show you the other log, I believe, that has errors in it. Open up the service trace tool again. And I don't remember which one I had in here last. Let me open this up. So this one might have some errors, and I think I saw something. Yeah, like right here. Indes connector cert couldn't be found. So it's a very useful tool to be able to troubleshoot what's going on. Right. Another location, which again you've already seen, is this PFX request. So here we will show you those PFX requests that have failed. And I do have a couple that are in here. So I'll just use this as an example. This was whenever I made my mistake. And so I showed you that for, I think, Android, I had, or maybe it was iOS, I had PKCS 2 or whatever. That's because the first one was a mistake. And it'll show you, hey, here's the certificate template that I'm being requested. Here's the last error. Now, in this case, it shows 0. But there's other things in here to indicate, like status, what our expiration time is going to be. You can see details such as what these codes mean for issue attempt. I don't have that top of mind, but you can definitely use those to help interpret what's going on, and so forth. Right. So good information to be able to help you troubleshoot. Now, once you have there's processing. I've never really caught anything in processing or uploading, but those are certainly temporary kind of transient folders. Once you have the cert delivered successfully, then you will have a lot more information about it, right? So here's the block of data that will tell you what's going on. You can see the upload status and so forth. Here's where I got the cert, or here's where you have the cert serial number. You can also go grab the thumbprint ID. Here's where I went and grabbed the thumbprint ID that I showed you earlier. So there's a lot of good, useful information in here to help you troubleshoot. All right. So that is working with the PKCS certificate profile deployment. Now, in terms of general, before we move on to the next one, in terms of general tips and tricks, right? So that was troubleshooting, general tips and tricks. If you're having problems here, always look back at your profile settings. This is where almost the entire time when I've set this up, I've made mistakes when I've had problems, right? Confirm your settings are correct. Make sure the certificate authority is correct. Make sure your template name is correct, etc. So on the certificate authority side, again, you can make sure that's correct by using certutil-ping, right? Follow the flow. So that's why I gave you the graphic as to what goes on where. That's where the logs will actually come into great benefit as you sift through that, right? So a lot of there are several common issues that are called out. This is in our documentation, but I wanted to put it here as well. So the RPC server is unavailable, right? Typically, this is going to be the error whenever the certificate authority detail was not entered correctly into your profile, right? An enrollment policy server cannot be located. Typically, this is going to happen if you need to manually configure the name of the certificate enrollment policy server, specifically the system that hosts the connector that we use in this. You can pretty easily do that using the add certificate enrollment policy server commandlet, and so that might help you. The submission is pending. So this issue is going to occur if you set the request status to pending, right? In that situation, the administrator has to explicitly include or approve issuing the cert. And so you can change that if you go into the policy module on the certificate authority and the properties and manually update that. And then finally, the parameter is incorrect. So if your profile is misconfigured, that's likely going to be the error that you receive. The submission failed, denied by policy module. Now this one's interesting. Make sure that you have the correct root certificate there. Also make sure that you have the correct template that is available. And then lastly, error negative 214-687-5374. Again, make sure supply in the request is configured in the subject name of the certificate template being issued. All right, so moving on. The next type of certificate profile that we want to talk about is what's called the PKCS imported certificate. So like before, let's start by looking at the supported platform. So similar or the same really as what we have for just PKCS. All right, and then that's as of this recording, so there's always work to add the other platforms. And then in terms of components, you're starting to see a couple of new ones pop in, at least one new one. So we have Intune, of course, a certificate authority. Now this one's interesting because yes, we will use the certificate authority to export the cert that we want to use in this, but the cert itself is not going to be requested directly from the certificate authority. Instead, the cert will be imported into Intune and delivered from Intune directly. We still will need the trusted root certificates. We will need a new connector called the PFX certificate connector, which you'll see me grab here in just a minute. We'll need a device that we're going to deploy to. And by the way, on the connector, I think I mentioned this earlier, but just to mention it again, the other connector that we've seen, the NDES connector is what it's named, but it applies to PKCS and the SCEP deployments. That supports up to 100 instances per tenant. The PFX cert connector only supports a single instance per tenant, so that is a difference. And then in terms of other things, Windows Server, we need this to be able to host the connector. And then finally, Visual Studio 2015 or better. I call that out as optional. It is optional. For all practical purposes, it's required because the instructions on how to set this up will utilize a pre-built solution that you can retrieve out of GitHub and then build that, and it just makes it so much easier. So for all practical purposes, it's required. And then how does this work? So here's the flow. So again, all of this flow assumes that the imported PKCS system is already configured. So once it is, the admin is going to import a PFX certificate into Intune. Now, in order to import this PFX certificate, it has to have been made available through an export already, right? And just as a reminder, imported PKCS typically are for email signing, email encryption, so that kind of cert is typically what we're talking about. Intune will then store the cert in an encrypted state. The passwords protecting the private key of the cert are encrypted before they're uploaded using either Windows cryptography or HSM there. And then, as you see, and then finally, when it's time to deploy this thing, the device is going to request the PFX cert that's been imported to Intune. That's going to have an encrypted password and the public key details sent through the connector. So this is going to be going to the server hosting your connector. And then the connector is going to shuttle that request back up to Intune. And then finally, Intune is going to deliver the certificate to the device. And also, the device will be able to decrypt it with the device's private key. Right? Then the cert's installed. So, a little bit of a circuitous process, but hopefully makes sense, and you'll see it work just here in a minute. Okay, so in terms of configuring this, I'm going to walk you through setting this up. In fact, some of the steps that you'll see might fail because I've actually already set this up, and so it's going to probably say something to the effect of already done or whatever. Right? But there's two blocks, if you will, of PowerShell that will be used to configure this. Now, I just put this up here to kind of show you how things line up. And so the yellow up here, you know, these kind of go together. The yellow down here, the orange or the rose colored, and all, just to show where different components of the PowerShell commands kind of land and work together. There's some work we have to do though before we get ready to run PowerShell. So let's start by pulling in our server that will host our PKCS connector. This is actually a server that I built fresh just for hosting the connector and to show you the setup and so on. In this server though, let's go ahead into the Intune console. I just rebooted it, so it's taken a second. We paused the video and I'll come right back when it's up. Okay, so the Intune management console is coming up. I'll maximize for now. And what I want to do is go get the connectors. So I'm going to go to Tenant Administration, Connectors, and Tokens, and then Certificate Connectors. And you'll see that I still have the one from the first PKCS discussion that we did active here. Well, it's in error state now, probably because that server is offline, but either way, we're done with that. I'm going to go add a new one. And here, I'm going to choose to download the imported PFX certificates connector. So I'll click on that, save as. I'll just put it on my desktop here. Save. All right, minimize, and here it is. Put it in the center of the screen. Right click and run as administrator. And so the only option I really have is the location for where I'm going to install it. So I'm going to leave it as default, agree to the license terms, and install. Okay, so, and then I'm going to configure. So if you did not select to configure, don't worry, you can easily get back to the connector. It's under the Microsoft Intune directory right there, and then this connector UI, here's the executable to launch it, right? And by the way, while I'm here, let me just go ahead and change. I just set this server up, so let me go ahead and change my view settings so that I can see everything. Stand by while I quickly do that. Show, display, remove, and remove, yes, okay. All right, so there we go. All right, so this is our directory for the connector UI. If you haven't, if you didn't launch it, but I did, so all I need to do is sign in. All right, now I'm going to sign in. It sees the account that I've already signed in with, which is cool. And I'm going to go ahead and click it. I may not even have to enter my password. Let's see. No, so I'm good. So that's it, right? Now, one thing here, I've seen people get into kind of a loop there where you enter your credentials, and here it does need to be global admin credentials in Azure. But you enter those credentials and hit OK, and it just loops and keeps asking you to enter your credentials again. If you see that, make sure that your IE enhanced security configuration is disabled for the duration of when you install. Once you have the system installed, or the software installed and connected, you can put IE enhanced security configuration back on if you like, but turn it off for the install portion if you run into that issue. All right, from here, if I have a proxy server, I can put in detail for it here, hit apply, which I don't have any settings there, so it's okay. And I'm going to hit close, right? So the connector is installed. Now I want to validate, in fact, that the connector is installed. So let me go back here and refresh the screen. And I have another one now. Here's the PFX connector, and it shows green status, and it shows connected right. Well, it's connected right now, otherwise it wouldn't be green, and we should be good, right? So you can look at the time, 1:51. Now that's part of the connector name, but you can tell it's right minute-wise with the time on my system. So we should be good. Now, so that's setting up the connector and getting everything ready to go. Next, I need to import my PFX certificates into Intune. A reminder, I am not going to be doing any discussion about the certificates here. Why? Because there is no direct connection, if you will, between this system and getting the, say it this way, the other connectors, the PKCS connector, the SCEP connector, will actually make a request of the certificate authority to automatically create a certificate, a unique certificate for the requesting device or user. That is not how this works, right? I will have a certificate authority, but I will need to, instead of automatically requesting it, I will need to export my certificate from that certificate authority and then have that available to upload into Intune. So I'm assuming that the certificate's there. I do have a PFX certificate ready to go to import. So let me go get that. It's on a network share. So over, oops, I misspelled that. 1 second. DC0 probably works better. Yes, it does. And then on the desktop, here. And so here's my PFX file right here, imported PFX demo. So I'm going to copy it locally. Okay, cool. So with that done, I need to go out and grab, so I mentioned Visual Studio 2015 or better is optional. Truly, it's kind of not if you're going to do this the easy way, because there are some solution files up on GitHub that will contain some pre-built code that I will compile with Visual Studio. So I'm going to go through the process, the first part of the process, to get the GitHub repository here. I've already gotten it, so I'm going to go to another system to actually use it, but I'll go through the process here. So bear with me. On GitHub, it's https github.com/Microsoft/Intune resource access tree develop source PFX import PowerShell. And hopefully I typed all of that right, and we'll go to the directory. And I didn't, hang on, let me type it back right, and I'll be right back. Much better whenever you use copy and paste. So here is the directory on GitHub, and here are the different contents. And what you want to do here is you either want to clone or clone the copy or download it as a zip file. The option to actually clone or download as a zip file isn't on this screen because you're kind of already into the folders that contain the detail for this particular PFX import PowerShell. So what I need to do is go back to the root level of Intune resource access, and now I have the option to clone or download. And I will click on that, and if it will cooperate with me, it's not doing it here. That's okay. I'm going to go to my desktop and you will see. So give me a moment to transition to my desktop. Okay, continuing. I need to be on my desktop anyway for some of the rest of this. So if you click on clone or download, you'll have the option to clone with HTTPS. What I did is simply said download the zip file. And from here, I would save the zip file. Now, the zip file in my case is on my desktop. Let me open it up. So here's the zip file as it comes down. If you open it up, you'll just see the files in. So what I needed to do is actually expand this and get the contents inside. Let me navigate directly to the expanded content. Okay, so here's the expanded contents, and I can drill in and you'll see the files that you saw up on GitHub are here. Now, this repository, you can't use these files directly. Instead, you need to actually import the solution file that's here into Visual Studio. And then from Visual Studio, you can go through and build your solution, your released solution, and then you can go from there. So let me open up Visual Studio, and we will go through the process of creating the release folder. So here I've already imported it, so I'm just going to open it again. And it opened on another screen. One moment, and I'll move it over. There it comes. Okay, cool. So I have this loaded, right? I didn't do anything, I just loaded it. So what I need to do is this will come up by default as build, as debug. You'll want to change it to release, right? And then once you do that, you're free to build, right? So you can go into build and then build your solution. And it's going to go through the process, shouldn't take too long. It will show you what the output directory is right here, right? Let me clear this. All right, and so succeeded, right? So the build succeeded, no problem. So this created a release folder. So what I want to do is go grab that. So I'm going to go grab this whole thing up until release. Pull this over a little bit. Up until release. Well, up until here, right? I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, and then I'm going to navigate directly to that location. And here is my release folder, right? This is the folder that I need. This contains everything that I need, and let me show you. So if I go to release, in here, you'll have some of the DLLs that are referenced by the PowerShell commands we're going to run here in a moment. So I'm going to take that release folder and I'm going to copy the whole thing over to my machine, my PKCS machine right here. So I'll get rid of GitHub. I don't need it anymore. I will paste this release folder onto my desktop. Great. And then I will go close Visual Studio and such, just so it's out of the way. Let me get rid of all of this and this and that and that. And so cool. Let's pull the machine back in. So I now have my release folder. Now that I've done that, then I need to make sure that I have, again, the DLLs there. I do, so I'm not worried about it. The one specifically, let me show you. The one specifically that I'm looking for, and there's several in here, but the one specifically I'm looking for is where is it? I'm looking right past it. Oh, there it is. Microsoft.management.powershell.pfx import, and there's a DLL there. That is going to be pivotal. That contains some of the stuff we will need here in just a minute. So let's go ahead and work through some of the PowerShell stuff. So the first thing, I'm going to run PowerShell and I'm going to keep it in the folder release because it makes things easier. I don't have to path, and the module, the DLL is there, so it has all the components that I'll be looking for. Right, so I will just run PowerShell. As an admin, I'm not running ISE, I'm just running PowerShell itself. Right, and changing directory to desktop. You know what, I don't think I'll, well, let's see. I don't know if I launched that as admin. Let me do that just for good measure. Sorry. Running PowerShell. Maybe I did. I don't know, but for sure now I have. Okay. So change directory to desktop and change directory to release. Cool. So now with that done, I'm going to, the first set of commands I'm going to run will be to create an encryption key from Intune using Windows cryptography. So what is this doing? So whenever I store the PFX cert in Intune, it's going to shuttle it to this system with the connector, and then this system will have to be able to decrypt. And so I need some detail from Intune to be able to do that. So this is going to help me get the detail I need for that, that connector to be able to read everything. So I'm going to import module, and since I'm in the local directory, I'll do it this way: Intune pfx import .psd1. So that's there, and that file is right here. So that's what I did, right? And then next, I want to add the key. So add Intune KSP key, and specifically there's a couple of options. There's hardware or this thing called Microsoft Software Key Storage Provider. I'm going to increase the size of this. I don't know how good this will be on some monitors depending on size. So let me go ahead and increase the font size of what we're looking at in PowerShell. There we go, make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so Microsoft Storage Key Provider, type it again. Add Intune KSP key Microsoft Software Key Storage Provider. And this is important because if you don't type this correctly, you'll get some errors. And then next, I'm going to call it the PFX encryption key. You can call this whatever you want. The second one, just make sure you be consistent because you'll use this again here in just a bit. In fact, Microsoft Software Key Storage Provider, you will use that again here in just a bit. So good, I did that. Now that I've got that done, I'm going to export the Intune public key. And dot Intune pfx import, oops, sorry, typing the wrong thing, dash provider name, and this is Microsoft Software Key Storage Provider. Hopefully I typed that right. The key name, so again, PFX encryption key. The file path will be my same folder here. So in quotes, :users/administrator, desktop, release. Yeah, I just use release. Release /PFX encryption key .pfx. And if I typed all that right, I didn't. So let me see what I did wrong and I'll be right back. Okay, so I realized what I did. I also closed this so it'd be easier scanned across the screen. So I had used administrator, not administrator, that Tailspin Toys. But now that I have that correct, then I'm going to hit enter And oh yeah, my focus is not in there. Stand by. If my focus is not in the release folder, then it's not going to know how to do it. Interesting. So stand by. Ah, you know what? It's because I did not import the module when I relaunched PowerShell. So let me do that. Live demos are fun. Import Intune pfx import.psd1. Okay, that's done, and let's try that again. Okay, cool. So that worked, right? And so now I'm going to CLS on this to clear the screen because we'll do some more stuff on this in just a minute. But now I have my pfx encryption key.pfx file there. And my encryption keys are stored from Intune on this device, right? So that's critical in order for the process of deploying the imported PFX certificate to work successfully. Now I need to go and import the PFX certificate or certificates, in my case one, into Intune so that I can then create a imported PKCS certificate profile and deploy, right? So here, again, I have my PFX cert, and don't be confused. This is the cert that you need for the connector to work, but you also need a cert, and I have one that I created. Thought it was, yeah, here. This particular certificate I created as a demo. This is a live cert that would go out to devices or users, and that would be what I would import into Intune. So as I go do the work here, understand the difference. So we're going to stay in the release folder, right? We're going to stay in the release folder, and normally I'll do it again. I would do if I'm starting from scratch, import module dot whack Intune there. So I've already got it imported. Doesn't hurt to do it again. Fine. Now I need to get Intune authentication token, admin username, and that will be me. Right. I feel like I'm making all sorts of typos. Intune standalone.onmicrosoft.com. Okay. Okay, what did I do? Get Intune authentication token, not IN. Let's try that. Okay, so it's popping up and it got my token. Here's the detail. That's all I needed for that. Now I need to go through and set a password. So go ahead and set off, sorry. Talking and typing at the same time are challenging. In fact, what I need to do is, this worked, but I need to set the results of this to a variable. So let me start from the top. Okay, so let's start over as if I'm importing it. I don't want to confuse at all. So the first thing is I want to import the module. And this already has been done, but I will do it again, no big deal. Then I need to get authentication token details. So auth result, I'm going to store this as a variable this time, equals get Intune authentication token, and then admin user name, in quotes, Steve Rack at Intune standalone.onmicrosoft.com. Okay, so got that, right? So we're good to go. The next step is I need to set a secure password and store that as a variable. So secure file password equals convert to secure string, and this will be the password that I'm going to use. So right now I'll just say XXX. I'll actually come back and run this in a minute with my password obscured as plain text force. So that's what I would do, and the XXX would be replaced by the real password. So I'm going to pause the video, change it to the real password, and be right back. Okay, so the password's off the screen. You can see the first couple of characters of it over here, but that is saved now, and I can show that it actually did secure file password. So, okay, cool. So it is a secure string. I've got it set there. No problem. And then the next thing that I need to do is set up the user context. So user pfx object. Type it right, Steve. User pfx object equals new Intune user pfx certificate. And here I would type in the path to the cert that I want to import. So path to pfx file. This is the file that I'm using to import into Intune. So c:\users \administrator here \desktop \release and \imported. Oh, what's that called? What is the file name that I used? Oh, it's sorry, it's in the wrong folder there. There we go. So that is the file name that I'm wanting to import. Now I need to supply secure file password. Right? And that's what I just encrypted. And then my username again. All right. And then finally, the algorithm, if you will, that I use to store the information. Microsoft software key storage provider. Okay, and then the name of the encryption key. So this is what I created earlier called pfx encryption key. All right, and then smime encryption and PKCS 1. Okay, let me double check that. Oh, the password I think is probably wrong. Let me fix that and I will show you what I did. Okay, yeah, so I actually got confused. There's a few steps here, so I got confused. This password that I was trying to secure for you is not the password of my user account, right? I specified my user account after the password, and I actually set my user account earlier with the $auth result, but the password specifically here is the password on the certificate itself. So on the certificate itself, I just used password. So I went back and changed my secure file password to password instead of the password that I thought it was for a moment on my user account. And then we're good. So this ran no problem. The cert is now imported into Intune. And so let's just do one more thing. Get Intune user pfx certificate and authentication result, auth result dash user list and my account. Okay, and so that's going and fetching from Intune, and it is an smime encryption. That's the one I just imported. Here's the detail about it, so I know that I have one certificate imported into Intune and ready to go. All right, so that work is to set everything up. These are the steps that that we did, right? Hopefully that made sense. A couple of little bobbles along the way with typos and such, but hopefully that makes sense. Now that that is done, let's switch and see this actually work. So I'm going to go into the console and I'm going to configure some settings real quick and deploy them, and then I'll show you what I did and be right back. Okay, so like before, I've got profiles configured for all 3 of the OSs in scope. So down here under configuration policies, you'll see Android device admin PKCS imported, iOS PKCS imported, Windows PKCS imported. Now, so these are very similar, right? These are very similar. There's only one difference. I'll just show you real quick. I'll just show you the profiles this way. If I go under platform and choose Android device administrator, the configuration type will be PKCS imported cert. And the only option for configuration is the intended purpose. So here, general purpose, SMIME encryption, or signing. The other options, so let's just show you the other 2, iPad, iOS, and PKCS imported certificate. Same options, except now we have not configured. And then the only one that really has any difference at all is Windows. So Windows PKCS imported, scroll down, imported certificate. Here, go to configure, and now we have to choose the key storage provider. So the intended purpose, just general purpose SMIME encryption, SMIME signing, but then what key storage provider. This is similar to what we saw for PKCS for Windows, right? So so this is it. You deploy it like normal. So I'm not going to belabor the point any further. So minimize this, pop out real quick, and just want to show you a little bit about troubleshooting. So one of the things, pull it back in. One of the things that you might have noticed, might not have, but is the fact that I have a dedicated server that I'm using for this imported PKCS demo. Right? The PKCS itself demo, I used the certificate authority for hosting the connector and showing you what I did here. I put it on a dedicated system. And so I just want to show you one thing. You saw this, kind of for the PKCS demo, but if I go to the Intune folder, so the same place is where the connector is installed, go to the Intune folder, I have the PFX certificate connector. If I go into here, I'll see the connector service, right? So this is where I can go in and see the DLLs and different things. The connector UI, that's where I showed you the executable is for launching setup if you need it. But we have PFX certificate recryption, server key gen recryption. These are new folders, right? And so if you refer back to the flow for this, you will see the flow talk about where certificates are decrypted and re-encrypted and so on. And that's where this is where that happens. But in each case, if you come into the folder, you will see the same kind of structure as we saw for PKCS. You will see certificates that are failed in processing, succeed, uploading, right? So this is, again, a great troubleshooting place to be able to go in and see those certificates, what's going on with them. We've already seen it for PKCS, same kind of deal here, so I won't show you again. But that's it, right? PKCS imported. It is the least used in my experience certificate template deployment in Intune, but still very important in certain scenarios. Okay, so our final certificate profile type that we want to talk about, and that is that's SCEP. And we'll get there. Actually, one thing I want to say before I totally leave the imported PKCS. So you saw me go through the process of importing the certificate into Intune, the PFX cert into Intune, and then you saw me go and create the profiles to deploy it. One thing you didn't see me do at all is select the cert, the imported cert to deploy. That's because it was imported behind the scenes and no specific selections available in Intune to be able to choose more than one, right? So the one you're going to deploy, you would just go ahead and upload using the methods I've shown, and then that's it. Okay, so moving on to SCEP. Now, I'll tell you that of the four certificate profile types that we're discussing in the session, this has the most moving parts.
Don't be nervous about it though, because you can set this up pretty easily, right? Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts, but it's not something to be afraid of. I'll walk you through how to do it, show you that it's working whenever I'm done, and then you can use this kind of as a pattern for whatever you do. So in the same vein as what I've shown you in the others, right? Some of the things I'm going to do in my lab, it may not be the only way that you can set something up. This is one way, and this is using the examples that we would have in our documentation and so on. And the other thing I would say kind of ahead of time is if you go look at documentation about how to set this up, you'll find a few different ways in which to do it. One way, I'll just tell you, I'll probably remind you when we get there, in terms of configuring the cert templates, right? There's some documentation you'll see that will, or some blogs and different things that will use the same cert template for all three kinds of certificate deployments that you can do with SCEP. And there's others, the way I'm doing it, where you have unique cert templates for each way of doing things. You'll understand that as we get closer. I'll try to remember to call that out, but that precursor as we get started. Okay, in terms of supported platforms, we are back to the list that we had in the beginning, whenever we talked about trusted root search, right? So we have Windows 8.1, 10, iOS, macOS, Android, the 4 different flavors of Android deployment and so forth are supported. In terms of the components that are required for setting up SCEP integration, certainly Intune, you need a certificate authority. You do need your trusted root certificates. Here, you need a server that specifically will be configured to host NDES. So NDES, Network Device Enrollment Service, is a component of your certificate authority, but you cannot install it on the same server as your certificate authority. So there's a server that I have that is dedicated to installing NDES, and so we'll see that happen. You need the NDES policy module. Now that is actually installed when you install the Microsoft Intune certificate connector, right? So a little bit of discussion around the policy module as we get closer to it. And then you need access to the NDES server from the internet. Specifically, there's two ways to do that. One is if you want to keep your NDES server purely internal and not put it on the in the DMZ, then you can publish your NDES server with the Azure App Proxy Connector, which is what we will do in the lab. And or you can use DMZ. If you want to use DMZ, you can certainly do that. But the Azure App Proxy is usually the preferred choice these days. Okay, so in terms of how this works, right? So here you're going to have, and so this again assumes everything is set up already. So you're going to have an admin. Here's a cert that I noticed just floating off in the ether, so you don't have to worry about that. So the admin is going to create a SCEP certificate profile and then target it to either a user or a device. So the device is going to get that SCEP profile. And that SCEP profile is going to contain the URI for the NDES server, right? And once we have that, then the device is going to contact the URI and then send the CSR and challenge to the NDES server. Now, I mentioned the policy module, right? This is the first place that I'll touch on that a little bit. So whenever you talk with the NDES server, you definitely need to authenticate, right? Well, when you're doing that from an Intune environment, we have to know how that authentication is going to take place. And so that's what the NDES policy module is for when you install the connector, right? So that policy module handles the challenge and so on. And so once we have that, then NDES is going to forward to the NDES connector policy module, which validates the challenge and such via the Intune service. And then finally, NDES was going to pass the request on to the certificate authority. The certificate is going to be delivered back to the NDES server. The NDES connector is going to report the certificate delivery and thumbprint to Intune. And then we are also, sorry, I skipped one step. So 6, the signed cert is going to be delivered and is also going to be delivered to the device from the NDES server. And then finally, we finish up and report the successful deployment to the NDES service. Okay? All right, so let's get into the fun part of actually going through and configuring this. So let me pull in
the server that will be my Indes server. Well, I said Indes, but I mean, I'm going to start with my domain controller. We'll get to the Indes server in just a second. So here's my domain controller, because the first thing that I want to do is configure a service account for Indes. So I have my MMC open here with a couple of things. Here's my users. I've actually already configured the Indes service account, so I'll just show it to you real quick. Indes SVC ACCT. And so if I go look at properties on this service account, well, it doesn't seem to want to be responding right now. No matter. The account is there. You see it. Indes SVC ACCT. The only attributes I need on there can be a standard user. That's fine. User cannot change password, and password never expires. All right, so we'll move on. Now, moving to the Indes server, this is the server that will become the Indes server. What I need to do here is go into computer management here and add that service account into my local IIS group. So if I go into IIS iUsers, I'm going to add Indes service account. There it is, into this group, and hit OK, right? And you'll see where that's needed here in a little bit whenever we configure IIS. Okay, so let's remove the Indes server for now and go back to my domain controller, which also happens to be my certificate authority, because we're going to go configure the templates needed for Indes. So I have the certificate management console open here, right here. And I've also, I'm going to go open, click manage, which I've already got that open here. And we're going to go create a couple of cert templates. So here I'm going to use the user template or the user certificate template for mine. I'm going to duplicate it and then go through and set up a few things. So here on the compatibility tab, I'm going to leave it alone. On the general tab, I'm going to call this Indes encryption. And I'm giving these certs the specific names that I am on purpose. You can call them whatever you want as long as you remember what they're for. This one is the Indes encryption cert. Now, and this is where I'm going to go through and create 4 different templates. In some documentation that you will see, again, it will talk about using only 2 templates. The first 3 will be the same thing, and then the 4th one will need to be created. That's fine for lab testing. For production environments, if you are going to have a need to deliver an encryption cert or a signing cert or whatever, then you want to create the cert for just that purpose instead of having it overlapped, right? So I'm going to do them unique here. So on the handling tab, on the request handling tab, I'm going to specify encryption as the signing type and say yes. On the subject name tab, then I'm going to say specify in the request. Again, these certs are unique per device and per user. And so I need to be able to supply that in the request whenever I submit the request and then get a unique cert for my purpose. Now, when I say I need to be able to supply the information, that's not going to be supplied by the user. Intune will do that with the information that it has and needs. It can fill out that information, as you'll see as we go forward, right? Also, so one of the last tabs here is security tab, and on the security tab, I want to add the Indes service account. So I'm going to check that one. Great, and give the Indes service account read and enroll rights. So I have read, I'm going to add enroll and apply. And then I'm also going to add the domain users to here and give domain users read and enroll permissions as well. Last tab that I care about here is extensions. So on the extensions tab, here I want to make sure that client authentication appears in the list. Right? As long as client authentication is there, we are good. So I'm done with this template. I'm going to select OK. Now, I made some changes on that template, which will need to be on the other templates as well. So I'm just going to take this new indes encryption template that I created and duplicate it so that the settings are carried along that I just added in. So now all I need to do is go in and change the name. So here I'm going to call this indes signature. And all I'm going to do on the request handling is change the purpose to signature. And that's it. All the other settings that I just configured are carried along. And so I am good at this juncture to just say, okay, right? So now I have the indes signature template here. So I'm going to go back and duplicate indes encryption again and create what's called the indes general template. I'll call it indes general purpose. All right. And then on the request handling tab, I will say signature and encryption. All right. And on the extensions tab, I need to go through and make sure under key usage that signature is not proof of origin is deselected. Right? That's really important in order for things to work on iOS devices. And with that done, I can just select OK. And I'm reminded that on my signature template, I did not go and turn off signature as proof of origin. So let me go do that. Here we go, extensions. So on key usage, I also will turn off signature as proof of origin here, right? So that setting, the signature as proof of origin, is only relevant on certs that have signature capabilities, which is this one, and general purpose. So I am good with that. Now, I need one more cert. And so I've created the 3 certs that can be delivered by indes through a SCEP request, right? I've got to create a 4th cert, and this 4th cert will be to enable SSL on my indes server whenever I get to that point. So to do that, I'm going to go duplicate the workstation authentication template and make a couple of changes. So I'm going to call this on the general tab, again, compatibility, leave alone. I'm going to call this indes computer. All right. And then I'm going to clear the published Active Directory, which it's already cleared, so I'm good. On the request handling, I'm going to make sure the purpose is encryption for SSL. Okay. And then on the subject name, it will be supply in the request here. Okay. And then on the security tab, I need to go in and add the indes service account. So I'm going to add indes, check names. All right. And make sure it has read and enroll permissions, which it now does. And then on the extensions tab, want to make sure again, client authentication and server authentication are present. So under application policies, I have client authentication. I need to go add server authentication. So I'm going to go edit this and add, and then server authentication right there. Okay, so I am good with that. Hit OK. And so I've created the 4 templates that I need, right? So I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to go to my certificate authority, right-click certificate templates, new certificate templates to issue, and we pop up the list, go down to indes. So here's indes computer. I can multi-select this, indes computer, encryption, general purpose, and signature, and I'm going to say OK. And these certificates now appear in the list on my certificate authority and are ready to be issued. So I am good with the certificate templates, right? One more thing I need to do on the certificate authority, and that is to grant the indes service account rights to interact with the certificate authority. So I'll do properties on the certificate authority itself. And then on the security tab, when it comes up, make the adjustments that I need. Okay, so here's security. So I'm going to add in indes, check names. Okay, we're good. And I'm going to add issue and manage certificates and also request certificates, and I'm good there. So I am now complete with the certificate authority and the adjustments that I need. So let's get this out of the picture for the moment. And now turn our attention to the Indes server and go set up and configure Indes. So here I'm just going to install the role. I'm going to launch Server Manager. And once this completes, add roles and features, right? Click Next, click Next, and click Next. And then I'm going to add Active Directory Certificate Services. And I'm also going to add Web Server. Here, add features. Okay, good to go. And then on the web server, I will come back and configure a few things here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and proactively add a few things that I know I need. Sometimes you'll see in the documentation that it comes back and tells you to do this later, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. I know I need HTTP activation, so I'm good with that. I also, for .NET Framework, want to make sure that I have HTTP activation, so I'm should be good with that. And click Next. Click Next. Now, here is my option for setting up my certificate authority. I'm not creating a new certificate authority. I already have one. Instead, I'm going to create Indes, and so you see the features being added for that. And then I'm going to click Next and click Next for Role Services. And here is where I want to go through and make sure a few things are set. Again, you can come back and check this whenever. But under Security, I want to make sure that request filtering is enabled. And it is by default, so I'm good there. Also want to make sure a few things are enabled for IIS, well, I'll get there in a minute. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, cool. So I want to make sure that IIS Metabase or WMI compatibility, scripting tools, and such are available. I don't think I require this, but I'll put it there just to make sure. There's another checkpoint where we'll do that in a minute, but I'm going to click Next. Right, and now .NET 3.5 is actually not on the default install, so you have to specify where to go get it. Right, so in my case, I have the DVD for the OS loaded, and so it's on my D drive. So I'll just specify, I think, well, so I don't make a mistake. Let me just open this up. So sources SXS. Oops, nope. Here. So this is the path that I want. So I will put the path in here and hit OK and hit install. And that'll take a minute to install, so I will pause and come back when it's done. So just checking in along the way, install still in progress. And install is done. So I'm going to click on close. Now that I've done that, you see the yellow triangle. I'm going to need to go in and configure certificate services, so Indes. So I'm going to take the defaults here, click Next. Indes is the only option that I have, so I will put a check mark there and click Next. Now, I'm going to, pardon me, specify the service account, and that will be my Indes service account. So, no, I want more choices. Use a different account, and Tailspin Toys, Indes, SVC, ACCT, password. All right, so I have that in there. Click Next. And then here, I'm going to need to specify my certificate authority name. So I can do it either way, CA name or computer name. I know the computer name that my certificate authority is on. So I will select from that computer name. All right, and so, oops, that's not what I want. Let me do it from the CA name. Okay, so easy enough. It just comes straight up. That's what I want is this. So I am good with that. Go forward. And then on the on this page, sorry, just accept the defaults and go forward. On cryptography, the defaults here should be fine. Go forward. And then finally on this page, we are done. Select configure, and it should go through and be configured pretty quickly. If you have a problem here, then you'll need to go back and remove all of this again and install it, at least remove the Indes server component, but we did configure successfully, so we are good to go, right? So I'm going to hit close, and then make sure there's nothing else that needs to be done, and there's not, and so good to go. The next thing we need to do is configure the SPIN for the SPN for the Indes server account. So I'm going to click on here, go into an elevated command prompt, right click, run as administrator, and set SPN-S and http://indes.tailspintoys.com. So that's the server name, the FQDN, for my Indes server. And then I'm going to specify the Indes service account name, Tailspin Toys, /Indes SVC-ACCT, and hit that. And so we're checking the domain, and we'll be registering the SPIN, and we're good. Okay, so now that I've done that, let me minimize everything. And the next step is I need to open the registry editor. 32, Edge 32, right click, run as admin here. And we're going to go down to local machine, software Microsoft, oh, come on, software Microsoft, and then cryptography here, and then SCEP right here. Now I'm going to expand this and just notice what's here. There's 6 items here, right? We'll be back in here in just a little bit. But for now, there's 6 items. Now, what I'm doing in the root of SCEP is I'm actually configuring the certificate templates that can be used to issue each of these types of certificates. So let me pull back in my certificate authority for just a minute on the side. Actually, minimize that. Let me get the window correct on the other screen. Okay, so let me pull this in besides. So this is why I named the certificate templates what I did, right? Here's Indes signature. Here's the signature. Oops. Here's Indes general purpose. Here's general purpose. Here's Indes encryption. Here's encryption. So I'm just going to refer to these as the exact name. Now you'll see that you can put one template in all of these slots and have that one template configured to satisfy the needs of all of these slots. To me, that doesn't make sense in a production environment. So creating unique templates for the purpose by which they're going to serve makes sense. So I'm going to go just type in the name. So Indes encryption is the name of the template. Whenever I configured the template, I called it Indes space encryption. The actual name of the template is removes the spaces by default. It actually could be a completely different name if you configured it that way. To me, that doesn't make sense, but whatever, just make sure that you have the correct name here. All right, and so I will hit OK there. Indes general purpose will be the name of this one. Hit OK there. Indes or signature encryption will be Indes signature. So we should be good here. Okay, so we'll be back to the registry in just a minute. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to run an IIS reset just to make sure everything is clean with IIS, nothing's pending. I'm going to do that from a command prompt and run that. So we're restarting IIS to get ready for the next phase. And then one more thing in the registry before we are able to test our functionality a bit. So local machine, so let me go back up to the top. Local machine, system, current control set, and then services, and then HTTP. All right, so under HTTP, we will have parameters here. Okay, so now you may have something here, you may not, right? And either way is fine. You just need to adjust it. So here I'm going to add a new value, and this is going to be a dword value. The first one is going to be called max field length. And that value is going to be set to 65,534. And then one more value, again, a dword, new dword. This will be max request bytes. Okay, 65,534, and we're good. Now these are very important indeed. Did I do that wrong? One moment. Decimal is what I want. Good thing I saw that. 65,534 decimal, and then this one decimal as well. 65,534. These are really important. Whenever you do work with Indes and Intune, there's going to be a lot really long URLs that are passed through, and so making sure there's plenty of space for those URLs is really important. So all of this work done, this is our first attempt to test Indes functionality, right? So to do that, I'm just going to type in HTTP, not HTTPS at this stage. HTTPS will come very soon. And the FQDN of the Indes server, indes.tailspintoys.com /certserve/mskep/mskep.dll. And so this should come up with this exact page showing that everything is fine. So this, at this moment, confirms that the configuration we've done so far is successful. All right, so let me just minimize that. And the next thing, we're going to go and configure IIS. So Windows Accessories, IIS. Where is it? Oh, not Windows Accessories, that's my bad. Windows Administration Tools. That's better. And yeah, here. Okay, so I'm going to expand Indes and go to the default website here, and in the field, I'm going to go to request filtering. Probably staring it right in the face. There it is. Okay, and I'm going to double click on it to open it. All right, and then over here, I'm going to edit my feature settings, and I need to adjust this as well. So this is fine, but this needs to be 65,534, and this needs to be 65,534. Okay, cool. All right, now that we're done with all this, I'm going to reboot the server and make sure everything is good. So restart, and I will let that happen and come back whenever the system's back up and running, and we will continue. Actually, we'll continue now, because the next thing I need to do is go into the Azure portal. So let me just go ahead and pull that out of the screen and go into Azure. So let's do that here. Okay, so device management. Oh, actually, I've been in the device management portal because that's Intune focused. Here, I need to be in the true Azure portal, portal.azure.com, because here I'm going to go configure my Azure AD application proxy. All right, so let's let that come up. All right, cool. Okay, so from here, I'm going to navigate to Azure Active Directory. And to enable the proxy, I'm going to go to application proxy. Now, I have one already created. It's inactive because I'm starting from scratch, but I do have one enabled. That's fine. So if you are ever in this state, One thing that you might want to do is delete this. Well, you can't delete it. We will delete it automatically if your connection is not active for 10 days, but I just recently disabled mine, so I'm going to go ahead and set it back up, and then we should be good. The only thing that I need to do is download the connector service. So I'm going to do that. Here's the system requirements. I'm going to accept terms and download. Okay, so I'm going to save that as a file on my desktop. Then I'll just need to move it to in my Indes server. All right, so I'm downloading and I'm good. Let me go move that to my Indes server and we will pull that back into the picture. Okay, so here's my Indes server. I have the Azure AD application proxy connector. I'm going to install that as administrator and agree to the terms, of course, install. Now, one thing about this, if you, you'll have to sign in as part of this. That's really the only configuration to speak of right here. So I'm going to sign in. If this doesn't work well, and I can't talk and type at the same time. So you need a global admin. If this doesn't work well, you might get into a loop or you might get an error, whatever the case may be. Make sure TLS 1.2 is configured properly. And in my case, it is. So setup is successful. I am good. Now, what I need to do now is go create my enterprise application, and that will point to my Indes server. So I'm just going to stay here. Let me open up the Azure portal again. Come on. Yeah. Go away. Continue. So here is me. All right. Yes. Okay. So now back in Azure AD. First, I want to check in on my connector and see if it has come back to life. Let's see. So it has. So we're active again. Now I want to go create an enterprise application, which will be for my Indes server. So I'm going to create a new application, and I'm going to choose an on-prem application, and then provide a little bit of detail. So first, the name. So this will be my Indes app proxy connector. The internal URL will be the URL to my Indes server. So https://indes.tailspintoys.com. And then my external URL is here. This is important for you to keep because you'll use this again in just a minute. In fact, let me just put that on Notepad here. So that is the internal FQ, or the Azure App Proxy FQDN of my system that I'm trying to reach from the internet. Again, my Indes server is not published at all to where it can get to the internet, or entities from the internet can get to it, right? So this connector is the only way that I will be able to do that. Pre-authentication here will be passed through, and then the connector group I will keep default. The backend application timeout I will leave as default. Translate URL and header I will say yes, so I'm down here, and then I should be good. So I'm just going to add that now into Azure. Okay, now I'm just going to go in and test real quick once this finishes up and see if I can get to my on-prem server. I should be able to as soon as the connector saves and so on. So I'm just going to go to another tab here and see if it's already done. I'm just going to browse to the Azure App Proxy URL, which should be pointing now to my URL internally. So I'm going to hit OK. Now, it doesn't look like it's set up yet. That's okay. We'll give it a second here and try it again. Looks like it's still configuring. Be right back when it's done. Okay, so that just finished setting up. We are here. Let's try that connection again to my Indes server, see if it works this time. So I'm navigating to it. This is it. Corporate data can't, it must still be in progress. It made it further this time. So let's just give it some time. We'll keep going and see what happens. So that's all set up. Now, the next thing I need to do is go issue my computer cert to my system hosting IIS. So that happens to be this server that's hosting IIS. So I'm going to launch my certificate MMC and request my cert. So that's going to be for local computer. So cert lm.msc will open the local computer certificate. Go to personal certificates, all tasks, request new certificate. So we'll get the certificate enrollment wizard, click next, click next. Now, one of the things you saw me do a bit ago is do a reboot. One of the reasons for the reboot is to refresh the token so that I can see the certs that I'm allowed to now enroll. If you don't see a cert here that you're wanting to enroll, it's because you probably don't have, or one of the reasons could be that you don't have either the rights to the cert or you don't have the token refresh. So here's my Indes computer. So the first thing I'm going to do is supply the detail that's needed, right? So there's two places. Subject name, I want to have common name and the FQDN of my Indes server. So indes.tailspintoys.com. I'm going to add that, right? And then under subject alternative name, I want DNS, right? And there's three things I'm going to add here. First is the FQDN of the Indes server. I'm going to add that. I'm just going to add Indes as the NetBIOS name here. And then the other thing I'm going to add is this URL or this name right here. Right. Okay. Right. So I have those three, and we should be good. Now, if you wanted to, you could go and add, in fact, I will, a friendly name for this. So this will be the Indes /IIS SSL computer cert, or whatever you want to name it. That just helps you identify it visually whenever you're going through. But I have this Indes computer now. The blue bar is gone. I'm going to ask to enroll, and I successfully enrolled. So I'm good. So if I go to my certificate store now, you will see that I have Indes Tailspin Toys. If I scroll to the right, you'll see Indes computer. So I know that I'm enrolled for that correct cert. Now that I have the cert, I'm going to go configure IIS to use that cert. So under Administrative Tools, IIS here, navigate down to the default website here, right-click, Edit Bindings, and I don't have 443. My certificate is to facilitate communication over port 443, so I will just call this, or I will create one for 443. All right, and HTTPS. All right, and then I'm going to go find my cert. Here is the friendly name of the cert, which makes it easier to find. I'm going to select that and hit OK. So I now have that configured, and my system should be configured for SSL communication. So I'm going to go back, and I'll minimize this. I'm going to go back and I'm going to test my functionality for this, right? So here's Azure. I'm just going to open a new tab, and this is going to be my local URL, HTTPS this time, indes.tailspintoys.com /certserve/mscep/mscep.dll. So I should get the exact same response that I got before, and I do. right? So I'm good. So even with SSL communication now, I know that I'm still okay and that everything is functioning the way that it should. Okay? And while I'm here, I've given it enough time now. I want to go ahead and test, make sure the Azure App Proxy is working. So here's my URL to the system that I'm on, right? And see if it will work and bring up the default web page. And in fact, it does. And that's kind of maybe a chintzy test because it is physically on the server that that I'm trying to do this on. So the best test would be to do this on a system that is not the same server. So I'm going to pull up, this is my web browser from my host machine that's hosting these VMs. I'll put the URL in here, try it again, and it works the same, right? So we know that the Azure App Proxy is in fact working fine. Okay, so we're good so far. Next, I need to go install the Indes connector. So I will go to the device management console. And as I mentioned before, the software here is the exact same software as what we installed for PKCS. The only difference is the way that we configure it. So under tenant administration, under connectors and tokens, then we're going to go to certificate connectors. And I have these two. Here was my PFX imported connector. Here's the PFX connector that is now defunct, which is fine. I'm going to add another. And this time I'm going to choose SCEP and download this. And you will see that it's the exact same. Come on now. It's the exact same software. Let me fix that real quick and I'll be back. Okay, so I think I fixed that. Let's go try this again. So IE will let me download. It will. So I'm going to save that as to my desktop. And I should be good. So let's minimize this. Okay, so here's my Indes connector. Okay, same exact software as I mentioned. Now, it's really, really, really important to make sure that you have all of your website stuff set up the way that you're supposed to before you proceed. So I know that mine should be, at least I think it is. So, but instead of assuming, let's go back into Server Manager and let's make absolutely sure. So we're going to add roles and features. And on my web server, I want to make sure under the web server that for application development, I do have .NET 3.5. .NET 4.5, you'll see in the docs, I have .NET 4.6, which is fine. Also, that I have the management tools that I expect that I would have. So I have IIS 6 management compatibility. I have IIS 6 Metabase compatibility. I have IIS 6 WMI compatibility. These two, I guess, are not strictly required, but I have them anyway. Under development, I have ASP 4.6. Well, interesting. So I don't have ASP 4.5 or 3.5. I thought I did. So that's very good that I went back to check. Right? So next. And then here under .NET, I have .NET Framework 3.5. And HTTP activation is turned on. .NET Framework 4.6. HTTP activation is enabled. So I'm going to let that one missing piece install, and then we will go forward to install the connector that we just downloaded. So I'll be right back when this finishes. Okay, we are good. So proceeding to configure the connector, running as admin. Cool, so click next, accept the agreement, of course, click next, and then here we're going to be creating SCEP and PFX. So next. Now I have to select the computer certificate that I configured onto IIS. So this is the default cert, Indes IIS SSL computer cert. So it actually picked the right one. But if you need to browse, then you can see other computer or other certs that are available. But I'm good with this one, so I'll just hit OK and click next and install. So we will install, and then the last page I want to configure to launch the setup when I'm done. But as before, if I forget to do that, then under Program Files, Microsoft Intune, here we have Indes Connector UI. Here's the executable that would allow you to configure. I'm going to go ahead and do it here. Launch, hit finish, and I'm going to sign in to Intune. Already have the account. Hopefully I won't have to supply my password. Let's see. And good. So we successfully installed. So no problem there at all. If you have proxy stuff that you need to put in, fine. If you did use an Indes service account, then you will need to change that here. So Tailspin Toys, Indes SVC ACCT. All right, so hit apply, and we should be good. Okay, now that we have that, we just need to make sure that the Indes connector that we just installed is active. So I'm going to go back to the device management. Cool. devicemanagement.microsoft.com and go into, come on, tenant administration, and then connectors and tokens, and finally certificate connectors. I should have 3, and in fact I do. So I should be good, right? So this one is definitely not the date that I just configured. 12/24 is the last time. 12/24 is the last time. So I should be good with all this. No problem. Everything should be working as expected. Now I'm going to go back and attempt to test my connection to my Indes server again. So using the same URL, https://indes. In fact, here it is, right here, indes.tailspintoys.com, search server. That worked before. This time, it doesn't, right? And that's totally expected. The reason that's totally expected is because, let me show you here. Let me go back into the registry and go back to local machine software, Microsoft, cryptography, and then under SCEP, right? So we had 6 items before. Now we have a 7th called modules, and there's this thing called the Indes policy module. So just tying things back together for you, let me go back for a minute. Here is where we're actually using the Indes policy module now to validate the security challenge. And because of that, now when I browse to the Indes website, it's not that the website's not working, it's giving a 403 because the challenge is expected to be different because the Indes policy module is doing things differently now, expecting Intune to be on the other end, actually doing things where I'm doing them now, and so we get that 403. But again, 403 at that stage is completely and totally expected. So the fact that we see that is actually a good sign. So that actually completes the configuration of the Indes server. The next step that I would do if I hadn't already done it is export the trusted root cert from my certificate authority and deploy that trusted root cert to my devices that I'm going to manage. But I've done that, right? So let's actually go watch this work in action. And so like before, I'm going to go configure a couple of SCEP profiles and then come back. I'll show you what I did and we'll go from there. All right, so I have the SCEP profiles configured. Let me pull in Intune and I'll show them to you. So first I'll just start top down. I have the Android SCEP profile configured with device admin, so properties, and 10 configuration options here. So just basically filling in, some of this is default, but subject name, format, common name is what I chose, alternative name, user principal name is what I chose. Key usage will be key encipherment. I chose the 2048 bits for the size, and hash algorithm SHA1. Now, interestingly, hash algorithm doesn't appear for iOS, does appear for Windows, so interesting. Do you have to choose the root certificate? And the extended key usage, I chose client authentication. Make sure that when you choose that from the drop-down, that you select add, right? Enrollment settings just kept 20% as the default. The SCEP server URL. So notice this is the URL from my Azure App Proxy, and it does contain all the way down cert serve msscep mscep.dll, right? So that is for Android, and I have deployed that to a user group, all users. And so let's go look at iOS, which is very similar, but just a slight difference or two. So I put SCEP2 here just because I wanted to re-trigger this based on a problem I had, which I'll actually show you in a minute. Okay, so properties here, 9 configured. And you see the same things here: certificate type, subject name, format, key usage, key size. What you don't see is SHA1, iOS trusted root cert I selected. I did the client auth again, and then the server URL. So that's good, and deployed that to all users. And then finally, Windows SCEP. All right, and so I did configure this as well, very similar, couple of differences, 11 settings here. So everything is cool up here. Right here, unique to Windows key storage provider, I enrolled in the TPM option here. And again, I'm using a VM, generation 2 on Hyper-V with my trusted TPM module enabled virtually, which works fine. Hash algorithm is back for Windows, choosing the trusted root key, and then the rest is the same. So I've deployed all these, right? And so the goal then will be to, or right after I did that, I triggered a policy check-in just to make sure things went along quickly. And actually I had problems. None of them worked. And I'm going to show you why. I still don't know why it happened that way, but I'll show you why. So you can check. It just kind of gives you the insight into the power of the troubleshooting you can do in this. Right, but they are good now. Even though you see in the status overview that it is error, that will resolve, right? So I'll go to device status, and right now it shows success finally. So I'm good. User status shows error, so that will update. Per settings status, no data yet, but I do have a certificate. And so I know that I am good, right? And this was the original configuration. I did not change this. I just went ahead and waited for it to retry, and we are good. Then on Android, SCEP, same kind of deal, shows error. Device status still shows failed. User status, failed. Per settings status, have no data, but I do have a certificate. So we're good. We actually were successful. The iOS SCEP2, I don't know what it's going to show yet. It doesn't look like it has any data yet, which is fine. It will catch up. And the configuration is working for sure. So it looks like it shows error, user status error. I don't know if it's even caught up yet to retry after I set this back up. Yeah, it hasn't. But you see that SCEP is working, in fact. No problem, right? So since iOS doesn't have anything, I'm not going to show you on the iOS. It's the same thing. You would go into settings and you would check to under the profile, management profile, and tap in there and verify the certificate is deployed. But what I will show you is that you can absolutely tell that your certificates are deployed by looking at the certificate authority as well. And so here's my certificate authority. Under issued certificates, I see Indes encryption is issued twice. Well, I have 2 devices that are happy right now, the Android device, the Windows device. So I have 2 Indes encryption certs. So I know that my certificate authority has in fact issued my indes certs, right? So that's helpful, right? And iOS will come in here at some point and be successful. All right, let me get this out of the way. With that said, and while everything's still percolating through, I do want to show you at least one system. I'll use my Windows system as an example to show you the certificate has been deployed and is in place. So let me pull that machine in. And I have my user cert store open, so I'll open up personal, go to certificates, and I have a couple here, so finding the right one is important. So I know which one I'm looking for just simply by the expiration date, because this is the most recent cert issued. If I look at the cert itself, typically I would look for a template name, but in this case the template name has not resolved yet. It's just a bunch of data numbers in there. So what I can do is look at the thumbprint. So 71 EBB, right? And so if I pull in my certificate authority, I will be able to tell which cert was issued, right? And confirm it was one from Indes. Let me pull in my certificate authority. And if I look, here's Indes encryption. So I know this is issued from Indes. If I double click on that and go down to the bottom, then in fact the thumbprint matches up, 71 EBB. So I know that my Windows machine has received my cert and I am good to go at that point. So that's it in general, but I want to show you a bit about troubleshooting, because this is really powerful what you can do and what you can learn in troubleshooting, right? So I'll show this to you kind of in the flow, and then I'll show it to you live. So these the logging capabilities start on the device. So I show Android, and I think this is, as I recall, Android and iOS. So these are console logs, company portal logs, if you will. Depending on the way that you have your device enrolled, you may or may not be able to get to these, but you can always work with support to get them. I'm not going to dig into the console logs on the iOS side. It would require me to have a Mac set up and pull those logs kind of live. And in Android, there's some interesting ways to do it as well, but nevertheless, you can. Almost never are you going to see, well, in my experience and what I've seen working with customers, almost never do you see errors actually getting the policy applied. The errors happen after we start to try to process that policy. So what happens next is IIS. This is a couple of entries in the IIS log, and what's happening is IIS, when the request comes in for the cert, there's two checks that happen. One, get CA certs. So this is just going to validate that we do have a trusted situation and we can get through and trust that CA. And then here's get CA capabilities, right? So both of these need to fire. If you only get one of them, then something's wrong with checking. So if I only had get CA cert and not get CA cap, then the cert validation failed. And there's ways to check that, and I'll show that to you in a minute. If there's get CA caps and that processes, that's cool. Notice these are get. If this actually works and it's fine, you'll see that this is followed by a post as well. Didn't put that in here for space reasons, but you'll see that. And then from there, we hand over control to the Indes plugin. There's a lot of logging here. I didn't actually write in the logging. I'll show you where you can find it. Indes plugin talks back and forth with the certificate registration point. And then finally, if all goes well, the certificate is delivered. So let me show you how this works. And I'll also explain, hopefully if I don't forget, what happened on my system initially to cause my problem. Okay, in fact, let's just jump in, right? So IIS logs first. So if I go into inetpub and then logs and then log files here, then I have a couple of IIS logs. I'm going to find the most recent one and just scroll down. Let me turn word wrap on so we can see the whole context a bit better. And so I'm just looking for get CA cert here, and then get CA cap, right? So these are get, and then get over here. So I do see, in fact, that I'm passing this test, I'm getting my certificates that apparently is being satisfied correctly, because then I'm checking the capabilities, and everything is fine at that level. And then I'm posting here to the certificate revocation point, and on we go, and so on, right? So now that I know that I'm good with IIS and have passed through there, let's follow this into the Intune logs, and next in line will be the plugin. So let's go into Program Files and Intune. Here's the policy module, and this is the plugin, so the log is Indes plugin. Now, to really be specific about this, you need to set these logs side by side, right? Because there's a lot of chatter back and forth between the Indes plugin log and the certificate registration point, right? So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. Let's see if I can turn word wrap off here. This was probably easier to read. So the key is that one thing is we're going to be challenging, we're going to want to validate in with Indes, or with the certificate authority Indes, whatever. And you want the challenge to return true, right? Well, notice verify challenge returns false, okay? That's a problem. And that's where I was stuck. I was trying to figure out why it was happening, and I did, and I'll show you where I did in just a minute. But as I scroll down, you'll see near the bottom that the verify challenge returns true, right? And so there's chatter back and forth. Indes policy module started. We're validating again, initializing, requesting certificate registration point. We've validated with that. We're good. Sending request to certificate, verifying the request, verifying challenge, exiting, notify request, and then we're done. But this is really not the entire conversation. As we work through this, we're handing back and forth to the certificate registration point log. So let me show you the certificate registration point log. So back under Indes, here's certificate connector service logs. And so here is the certificate registration point that is the log that's valid for the most recent run where I was successful. So let me show you that first. I'm going to just pull that over into SVC Trace Viewer, which is far more happy way to view this. And so what you'll notice, just reading from the top, as we work through verify request started, that's where we're chatting back and forth. Phase 1 started. This verifies the challenge, so that is all good. Reading signing encryption certificate, reading signing certificate. Now, keep that in mind. I'll show you that again in just a minute. But here we were fine, so we read them successfully, verified the signature, decrypted the body, so phase 1 passed with true. Now phase 2 started for the device and user, and we continue on. We check if the challenge has expired, and we're good, and phase 2 finished. Now we're entering into phase 3, and validation phase 3, and off we go, right? And so you can read through this a lot more at your leisure. You can see back and forth where things finally finish. So we're dropping a file here, right, to notify that everything is okay, and then notify finished. But that's a successful one. The one I encountered at first was, I think, this one. Let's load. Yes. And so what you see here is reading encryption cert, reading signing cert, and then exceptions, right? Well, what happened to me, and I don't know why, honestly, I don't know what happened, but this entry in the registry, so this is the path that is in the log indicating where we're looking, right? We're looking for a signing certificate from this registry entry. This registry entry here, it has a signing certificate now. It did not have a signing certificate whenever I looked at it and saw that error and was trying to figure out what was going on, right? So what I did is I just uninstalled the connector and reinstalled the connector, and everything got put back correctly. So I don't know why that happened, but that is the problem I was having, and I found that because of the logs. And so having these logs is And these logs are indispensable to helping you be able to troubleshoot what's going on, right? Now, another couple of points I'll just, since I am in the registry, that I'll point to real quick is this one for sure, right? This is one of the registry keys I was going to show you anyway, because it is containing a bunch of really key information that you need along the way to make everything work. Another piece of information that is, we've visited this before already, but it's critical, so let's go back, right? I'm getting lost in the registry here. Okay, so cryptography, right? Under cryptography is where we have our modules, right? So here's SCEP, and that's fine, and this is where we can validate all the certs are matching up to certs that are on the CA. One mistake that I've seen a couple of people do is they will actually create these certificate templates, and they will do it correctly, and they will line them up in the registry here, no problem. But then when it comes time to move on, they forget to issue the certificate templates, and then that gets into all sorts of problems because the request comes in and the template isn't there to be approved, right? And then also under SCEP, here's modules, and this is the NDES policy module that is here, right? And good information as well. Validate your URLs and so forth. Okay, so lots of good troubleshooting stuff out there that you can leverage to see what's going on. Let me close all this up and we will move on. Cool. All right, so tips and tricks as we start to move toward closing this out. So NDES testing, right? Be careful about the blogs that you read. There's a lot of good information out there. There's a lot of information that looks good, and it is in the context under which it's written, but it's not useful here. And I ran into a couple of those as well. There's some blogs out there that discuss validating NDES operation by using a batch file and a manual certificate request. And that's phenomenal, except, as we've talked about, when NDES is properly configured to work with Intune, that method, using a batch file, using a manual request, it's going to fail because the policy module is in place. The NDES policy module from Intune is in place, and that policy module is built to do authentication the way that policy module expects. And so if you have the NDES connector installed and that NDES policy module, those manual testing steps will fail. Now, if you want to test that before you install the connector, cool, right? But just be aware of that. And if you do try with some of those batch files and manual cert requests, you'll get an error 401, typically unauthorized, and that's why, all right? The Azure AD connector, so when you install that, you saw really easy in my environment, but you saw me run into the problem that I'm telling you about here. You need to make sure that you're allowed to run scripts, right? So enable scriptlets. Well, so enable, in my case, sorry, I'm getting confused. In my case, I had a download problem. During the install, there may be a failure in you don't allow scriptlets to be run or certain things, right? So just be aware of that. You might have to go into IE and allow something temporarily that policy might be blocking in your environment or whatever. Intune NDES connector. So again, make sure IE enhanced security is disabled if you're having problems circling whenever you're trying to sign into Azure, right? You can see, you can use the NDES connector setup log as well, which will give you hints in case you're having problems. Validate your configuration. So you saw me go through the IIS logs and talk to you about how IIS validates its certificate authority capabilities and validates its certificate authority certs, right? Well, you can do that as well. So let me pull back in the lab just for a minute and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So just open a browser and we can paste in, this is because of one of the security settings I did. We can paste in, let me show you what I'm going to paste in before I do it. I'm going to paste in this command. So this is me going through the app proxy, which I'm local, so I don't have to even do that. and I'm calling the get CA cert message myself, and that's it, right? That's it. So I'm just going to call that and see what we get. Okay. Web page not found. Let me do. I'm actually going to use my my main URL. Indes.tailspintoys.com. Okay, so that's, sorry, I wasn't even noticing down here. So notice it produces an mscep.dll. And so I'm going to save that, save as, and I'm going to save that. All right, now let me go to the desktop here. And I can't really do anything with a DLL file. I need to rename this. This really isn't a DLL file. I need to rename this to a P7B. Now, if you don't have, while I had the video paused, I'd forgotten to turn on the view options to allow me to see file extensions and everything like that. So if you can't see the file extension and so on, make sure your view options are set appropriately. But I'm just going to rename this to a P7B file. All right, and now that I have a P7B, I can open this and I can see these certificates that are in the chain. And so I have my Indes MSCEP RA, and here's my my certificate authority, trusted root cert. And so I can just visually inspect this and know that the trust relationships are what they're supposed to be in order to pass this test. If I didn't have one of these, then there would be a challenge I'd have to investigate, right? So nifty little troubleshooting tip to see what's going on, right? I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. And then one other URL that's also helpful, let me put that into Notepad as well. So this one is the same initial part, but here I'm doing the get CA caps and message right here, right? So I'm gonna go actually put this into IE, and I will use the Indes this time. Well, I thought I would. I guess I won't. Let me adjust this to my on-prem URL. Okay, good. So this will just simply list out the capabilities of your certificate authority. So if you're trying to request a particular cert that is not listed here in terms of what can be delivered by that certificate authority, then you're going to have problems, right? So those two tests, you can at least visually inspect what's going on there. And then in general, make sure that in some cases, your device may need to be unlocked in order for configuration to apply. Okay, so that is it. We've been here for a while and talked about a lot of different certificate configurations, the trusted root cert, the PKCS delivered cert, the PKCS imported cert, and then finally wrapped up with SCEP. So thanks for hanging out with me. We'll go ahead and wrap the session here, and we will see you next time.